start? All right, everyone, if you could take a seat, please. We'd like to get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. If everyone could please get seated, we'd like to get started. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us for the Sunshine Week celebration at the National Archives and Records Administration. For those of you who do not know me, I am Alina Simo. I am the new OGIS Director, Office of Government Information Services, and the Federal FOIA Ombudsman. I'm so pleased to be with everyone today to celebrate Sunshine Week at the National Archives. This is the second annual event that we have had here at the Archives, and I'm so pleased to be here in the wonderful William G. McGowan Theater. We are happy to be joined by those of you who are both sitting in the theater. Thank you for coming today, and also watching us on live stream on YouTube. And thanks so much again for joining us to celebrate Open Government today. We are happy to have a wonderful set of speakers for you today, and because we're sort of already running a little late, we're going to keep this agenda rolling. I'd like to briefly introduce you to the Archivist of the United States so he can officially welcome you all to kick off today's program. David Ferriero was confirmed as the 10th Archivist of the United States on November 6, 2009. Prior to his confirmation, David served as the Andrew W. Mellon Director of the New York Public Libraries. Before he joined the New York Public Libraries in 2004, David served in top positions at two of the nation's major academic libraries, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. He earned his Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts degrees in English Literature from Northeastern University in Boston, and a Master of Arts degree from the Simmons College of Library and Information Science, also in Boston. Since early in his tenure, David has committed the National Archives and Records Administration to the principles of open government, transparency, participation, and collaboration, which are the very values we are celebrating here today. Please join me in welcoming the Archivist of the United States, David Ferriero, to the stage to begin today's program.
Thank you, Alina, and welcome. Happy Sunshine Week. Welcome to my house. It's great to have you with us. This is the 5th year in a row that I have marked the occasion of Sunshine Week and the importance of FOIA and open government here at the National Archives. And 2nd year in a row, as you heard from Alina, that I've welcomed an audience into the William G. McGowan Theater to help us celebrate open government. The National Archives is the appropriate location for this celebration, and it's fitting that this takes place during the birth week of James Madison, our nation's father of the Constitution, in an auditorium just a few hundred feet from here, where you can see the original document. The National Archives makes access happen. In recent years, technology has drastically changed what it means to make access happen. Thanks to the internet and our ability to digitize documents, people around the world can view and interact with our Constitution without ever having to walk through our doors. I invite you to visit the Constitution, the Declaration and Independence, and Bill of Rights in the Rotunda after the program or during the break. When I became the Archivist of the United States in 2009, I was excited to have an opportunity to help shape a government that is more open and responsive to the public we are intended to serve. And I'm incredibly proud of what we have accomplished in the last 8 years, what we have accomplished so far. We've modernized our records management guidance. We've helped improve the administration of FOIA. We've streamlined the declassification process. We've increased the impact of open innovation activities, and much more, and so much more to do. One of the areas that I want to continue to explore and that I'm looking forward to discussing with the new Librarian of Congress in just a few minutes is how we engage the public with our records and how we recruit the public to help us expand access. Today's event is organized by the Office of Government Information Services. As the FOIA Ombudsman, OGIS has a natural home within the National Archives. Since opening its doors in 2009, OGIS has resolved FOIA disputes between agencies and requesters and established a compliance program that helps agencies identify ways to improve their FOIA processes. A few months ago, Alina Simo took over the role of Director of OGIS, and I know her decades of experience with FOIA at DOJ and here will be an asset to the office, building on the work of her predecessors, Miriam Nisbet and James Holzer. We have an exciting program in store for you today. We'll begin today's program with a discussion between me and the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden, about the critical roles our institutions play in preserving national treasures and how we can expand access to our holdings. Afterwards, we'll be joined by noted experts and advocates for the FOIA. We have pre-recorded remarks from Chairman and Ranking Member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. My gratitude goes to Chairman Chaffetz and Representative Cummings for taking the time to help us mark this occasion. And I'm pleased to see continued bipartisan support for FOIA. It's worth noting that Representatives Chaffetz and Cummings worked across the aisle and with their colleagues on the Senate Judiciary Committee to champion the recent successful effort to update the FOIA, passing the FOIA Improvement Act of 2016. And finally, we have a panel highlighting how technologists, including people here at the National Archives, are using technology to put the government at your fingertips. I want to thank Tom Sussman, the Director of Governmental Affairs at the American Bar Association, for bringing together a fascinating group of people to take a look at the first 50 years of FOIA, not that they've been doing this for 50 years. And I also want to welcome back OGIS founding director, Miriam Nisbet. Where are you, Miriam? Stand up. And thank you. And thank her for moderating our other panel. Miriam is very important because she basically created OGIS from whole cloth. So thank you, Miriam. Without further ado, I'll turn the program back to Alina to introduce my friend, Dr. Hayden.
Thank you, David, for your remarks today, and thanks to both you and all of NAR's leadership for your continued support of the work that OGIS does. Open government is a term that wraps together sometimes disparate concepts of transparency, participation, and collaboration, but at the end of the day, all open government efforts have one thing in common. They put the public in the driver's seat of our government by encouraging understanding of an agency's actions and engagement with public officials. To begin today's celebration of open government, it is my great pleasure to introduce the first topic. As the archivist stated, the holdings of the National Archives and the Library of Congress constitute some of our nation's greatest treasures. Today, we have brought together the heads of these two critical institutions for a discussion about expanding access to their holdings. It is my great pleasure to introduce the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden. Dr. Hayden was sworn in as the 14th Librarian of Congress on September 14th, 2016. She is the first woman and the first African American to lead the National Library. She was nominated by President Barack Obama on February 24th, 2016, and confirmed by the U.S. Senate on July 13th, 2016. From 1993 until last year, Dr. Hayden served as the CEO of the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland. In January 2010, President Obama nominated her to be a member of the National Museum and Library Services Board, and she was confirmed to that post by the U.S. Senate in June 2010. Dr. Hayden began her career with the Chicago Public Library as the Young Adult Services Coordinator from 1979 to 1982, and as a library associate and children's librarian from 1973 to 1979. She returned there in 1991 to serve as the Deputy Commissioner and Chief Librarian until 1993. Dr. Hayden received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Roosevelt University and a Master of Arts and doctorate from the Graduate Library School of the University of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carla Hayden and the archivist.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Hearing those years go by,
I know, at least she
or
didn't
something,
give dates
and
on
they kept
my introduction.
going farther back.
Carla and I are old friends. The library world is a very small world, so we all know each other. So it's really great to have you in town, and this is our first performance in my house, so welcome.
Thank you.
It's great
Thank
to have you here.
And this is a wonderful house.
This is unrehearsed. We have not, we have some talking points, but we have not talked about how we're going to talk, so we're making it up as we go along. But I would like to start with just talking about what got us into librarianship.
Oh,
What was it that, that got you started?
well, I call myself an accidental librarian. After I graduated from undergrad, thinking I was going to either go to law school, political science, history, wasn't quite sure. I wasn't also having much of success getting a job in between while I did it. So because I love books and reading and things like that, between interviews where I was politely told I had no experience, I would go to the Chicago Public Library and the old Cultural Center. And one of my graduate colleagues said, "Hey, are you here for those library jobs? They're hiring anybody with a bachelor's degree in anything." So, yep, he didn't get the job. And I went upstairs and I did it. And then, though, they put me on the south side of Chicago in a storefront library, and a lady, Judy Zucker, who was with jeans and frizzy hair and telling story time to children with autism. And she was going to graduate library school. And that's when I said, this might be kind of interesting. So I got involved with the profession and finding out what it really could do. I was very involved, I mentioned political science, with empowering communities and things. And so the idea that libraries could help and really be more than just a place to check out books was also what sold me.
And a similar experience. I was an undergraduate at Northeastern University in the co-op program, and I was an education major at the time. And my advisor thought that shelving books in the library at MIT was pretty close to education. And
Probably was.
yeah, but I didn't. It took her a while to convince me that this was a good move for me. And so I did. I went to MIT and shelved books and ended up staying there for 31 years, leaving as the acting director. And it was that experience of realizing the power of a library in an individual's life, student or faculty, in that situation, researcher, but just the power of information and the joy of connecting people with the information that they need. So that was what drew me to then think about library school as a way of...
And that power of connecting people to information is what really kept me in Baltimore, Maryland, where you could see it was boots on the ground. This information that was provided and the programming was really helping. You really felt it. And so I have to say that when I was had to think about how could I serve as Librarian of Congress, how could you have that same sense of helping people connect with things that might change their lives. And that's when I really did some soul searching and then found out more about what those opportunities could be.
So I had great experience, MIT and then Duke. Duke, who just recently won the ACC tournament. You may have heard about that.
University of Chicago is never in anything that relates to sports.
That's true.
So.
And then the New York Public Library, where I learned really the value of the public library and those neighborhood libraries, the power of them. So I was very happy in that position, and out of the blue got this call from the White House about this particular job, and I turned them away twice because, you know, they were looking for someone who knew the business, and that's not always the way they filled these positions. And so I guess I was a little suspicious about it. And then this was a 12-year-old working on appointments for the president, and we had 2 conversations, and finally an adult called me and asked if he could come to New York and talk to me. And it was the conviction on the part of the administration that the National Archives had a role to play in the Open Government Initiative, and that was what tipped the scale for me. in terms of thinking of taking on this assignment, the opportunity to open up, to use the records in a transparent and collaborative way that has never been done before, and to push on that, to make as much information available as possible.
That's what hooked me to, being asked, one, to serve as the Librarian of Congress, and that operative word serve, and also having President at the time saying, I've been able to see all these wonderful treasures at the Library of Congress. The contents of Lincoln's pockets the night he was assassinated, the draft of the Gettysburg Address, and also the Declaration of Independence with all the crossouts. But that's because I am who I am. What could you do to make sure that everyone had that type of access? And that's what hooked me.
That's a very different attitude, I would say, for the Library of Congress than it has been in the past.
And I wouldn't just say, and I can say this because I'm a career librarian, and you know this too, sometimes, especially with, this is being taped and broadcast, and
true.
It's okay, but I'm saying this because sometimes in the effort to preserve and protect materials, there's a tension with making them available.
Gatekeepers.
Right, gatekeepers and preservationists. I mean, everybody can't just look at that draft of the Declaration of Independence and pick it up and do things. So how do you make it accessible? And that's where technology offers such an opportunity in digitizing the materials, making it so that you could see the cross out from subject and how they put citizen in there, and see all of that come alive, and then you have the finished document. So that's where I think the interplay between the drafts and then the official, that people could really get a sense of that.
But you've been very public in your when you were sworn in your speech there about opening up the Library of Congress to new audiences.
Yes.
Very similar to what we've done here. Focus on the K through 12 community. We feel a huge responsibility here around civics literacy. You know, civics has disappeared from the K through 12 curriculum. We feel a huge responsibility to compensate for that and teaching kids how the government works. But you've been very public about your desire to open up the Library of Congress to kids.
And to learn history, but then to encourage them to make history and to feel a part of this journey. And my favorite digitization project lately has been the Rosa Parks papers. And to be able to show young people that she felt very conflicted about just telling her life story, and then how she felt about her arrest and things, to give them a sense that great people in the past had struggles, and this is what happens, but you can make history too. So learn history to make history.
That's a great attitude. You and I, since you started, have been talking about cooperation and collaboration among the institutions, since we don't have a very strong history there, and adding David Scorton into the mix.
Yes. We're calling ourselves the Gang of Three now, I think.
Gang of Three,
I think that's a
right.
Washington thing. The Gang of. So we're the Gang of Three, the three cultural institutions.
So talk about some of the ideas that you think you just
I just mentioned
right?
one.
They weren't here, so.
Oh, well, and it's because as soon as I see him, we start cooking up things, and even to the point of a rivalry with the sleepovers.
Yeah.
When I arrived, and this is a friendly rivalry, but the National Archives has a very popular young people's program where, from what I was told immediately, almost right after my swearing in, David Ferriero cooks and makes pancakes for the kids at the archives. So we're thinking, what if they start out at the Jefferson Building, Thomas Jefferson Library of Congress, because he helped
Macaroni
bring
and cheese.
macaroni and cheese. So we have macaroni and cheese, we talk about that. Then at the Smithsonian, you could either have the Natural History Museum or American History Museum. That's where you have the sleepover, and then the next morning, you go to the archives for the pancakes. Now, this is just children's programming, but for instance, the Library of Congress has the papers of the Wright brothers, and the National Archives has
The patent and the, actually the RFP, that was, awarded to the Wright brothers for the creation of the heavier than air flying machine.
right, and the Smithsonian has the machine. And so what if you had cooperative programming? You could have David McCullough come, he just did the Wright brothers, but starting to think about what does each institution have. For instance, I mentioned Rosa Parks. The new National Museum of African American History has the last dress that Rosa Parks was working on. She was a seamstress. We have the papers, and also her purse, the little Bible that was in her purse, and the iconic photo of her with the card saying Taylor in French, and her thoughts on that. What if you have connections for people? It makes the visitor experience, not only in person, but even online, richer. And I think that working together to show how this is all connected would help.
We've been spending a lot of time thinking about how we can engage our user community in the work that we're doing using crowdsourcing kinds of techniques. We've created the first social catalog where folks can actually help us transcribe. You know, this problem with cursive, and kids aren't being taught cursive, and the ability to read the documents. So in our thinking about ways to engage the community, we've got a transcription project, we have a tagging project, all available through our public catalog. Have you, at this point, gotten to the point where you've been thinking about ways of engaging the public?
We're thinking about it, and I'm sitting here going, wow, yes, that's just, and we're getting to think of ways of working more with interns and with the K through 12 community, but also the teacher in residence program, and having teachers take our materials and have curriculum that they can use. Also engaging the younger people
Yes.
that are very engaged but need a way to connect to the institution. And so you'll be seeing a few more popular culture things at the Library of Congress, which has the world's largest collection of comic books. So there's a pretty popular convention and conference coming up in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
And so we will connect with them and do things. So you have the popular culture part, but also how can you get the information, the metadata? That seems to be one of our challenges. You can have these materials, but if you don't have a real searchable database to let people get to them, that's a difficulty. So we'll be watching what you're doing too.
One of the real problems around FOIA is that the great mystery it is to many of the general public, but to kids especially, don't grow up with some sense of understanding and entitlement around FOIA. So in our Open Government National Action Plan, we put a stake in the ground about doing some work to get into the K through 12 community and start educating around what FOIA is and the power of FOIA.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing in terms of educating young people about copyright. And that C is for caution, meaning something's going on, and you start out, because in this environment, being able to use materials responsibly is something that needs to start at an earlier age. And so we're working on that same aspect.
So this education business is another area where we need to talk, because all three of us are involved in various ways in especially with the K through 12 community, creating curriculum. We all have education specialists. We need to do a better job of working together on, right?
I think this gang of three might take over. I think because we have the materials, though. That's the thing.
Exactly.
The Library of Congress, and you have the presidential libraries, but the Library of Congress, because it started in 1800, no rivalry, but
Oh, no.
1800.
We do have more,
the
we do have
first
more
cultural
stuff than you
institution.
do.
Isn't it fun? Who has, we went through this with Hamilton, so we're all claiming Hamilton. So we have the last letter that he wrote to his wife Eliza before.
We have his oath of allegiance that he signed at Valley Forge.
But I think that's more, relevant and relating to the public with that last letter. So this is the kind of stuff that we talk about, who has what. The Library of Congress, the papers of 23 presidents, starting with George Washington and his inaugural address and all of that. We are going to make sure that there are 12 presidents that are left, their papers to be digitized, that shortly we will finish that. That's Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson for World War I, all of the really complementary materials that go with the official records, you can see, and we want to make sure that that's happening. So,
Do you have closed records?
yes. There are some materials that are given to the library with a stipulation that they can't be made generally public for a number of years. And that's been interesting, and that seems to be a way. I know the Smithsonian has a few items that are not to be displayed publicly for certain terms, and that's a pretty common thing. But Benjamin Franklin's papers are all out there. And the time that he was a vegetarian for about 2 months, it didn't last long in Paris when he was doing that. So you have all this fun. Sigmund Freud's
That's right.
papers that we
That's right.
just digitized those. And I get goosebump moments and just almost every day, and I am tweeting. I know you collect the tweets, but I'm tweeting. And I started that right after the swearing in because with the millions of items, I said, I want everyone to discover with me. And just about every day there's something. So, and you have this experience too, where your staff members, your curators, your archivists are really the gems because these are just things without the people to interpret it. So I'm standing there, they're showing me the Sigmund Freud things that they just digitized, and then the curator said, and here is his correspondence with Albert Einstein. Whoa, okay, what were they corresponding about? Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud. Well, Albert Einstein wanted to find out from his kind of friend, why did human beings still need to wage war with all of the things? And after 16 pages, Sigmund Freud said, I don't know. But we'll look into that. These types of things that are just there waiting for the public to see and think and interpret.
We have similar collections in that discoveries are made every day in them, and that's the most exciting thing about our jobs is creating the environment, the culture that allows that to happen, and the generation of new scholarship that's made possible through these wonderful collections.
And anybody can be a scholar, and that's the thing, to not
right.
make it exclusive. You're growing scholars. You're getting it. People are very concerned, for instance, some people are concerned about the lack of civics or the lack of real historical investigation that goes on in schools or not taught that. But what if we can capitalize on the interest in history and work with young people to really make sure there's a pipeline, that they see it as fun. It's detective work.
That's right.
One of the best books, it's older, The Historian as Detective, that really takes each historical discovery and makes it almost like a Sherlock Holmes type of situation. And that's what you do. You dig in the archives.
That's right.
Now, I think we said we were in the spirit of
Yes.
this week.
Openness and transparency.
Openness and transparency, that I said, if there are any questions or anything people would like to have us discuss. I don't know if we have time for a couple of,
Alex came loaded with questions.
oh my, okay, good.
Thank you so much for taking this time. It's great that you're focusing on Sunshine Week. My name is Alex Howard. I'm at the Sunlight Foundation. We like sunshine. So I have questions for you. One is what you're working together on, and then one is what we've worked together on. The first one is that, as people know, we've been encrypting things for a long time. If you go to the National Cryptologic Museum, an awesome place up the road a little bit, you can see the nation's history of it. You can see that we had ciphers and rolls, and that from the very beginning of the nation, our founding fathers, our military, and even our citizens were using coded messages to exchange information with each other. So I'd ask both of you, how has the nation approached this issue of making some records secret, impervious to being able to understand what's in them, and making those records available to the public over time? Particularly, of course, people know today that very strong encryption is available to the public on our devices, and that in cities and states and here in DC, people are using those apps to protect the communications from people who want to get to them, but that also may in fact make them impervious to record keeping without access. That's the first one. Second is what you're working on together. One of the things that is extraordinary about the National Archives and the Library of Congress that is using the power of technology to make America's history available to the public wherever the public is. Our taxpayer-funded data, our taxpayer-funded documents, research, all put up and available. Huge amount of progress. As you may know, and it is Sunshine Week, so we're talking about this in an open and frank way, people are concerned about the continued availability of those documents on the internet to the public. The National Archives has not taken the stance it might on making those records available at the federal agencies. They defer to the agencies in making government data and websites accessible and permanent. The Library of Congress has contracted with the Internet Archive to do their end-of-term crawl to make certain websites available. Where do we stand with making sure our taxpayer documents and data remain available to the public because we've paid for them, and addressing some of the takedowns that we've seen, most notably at the USDA, of animal welfare data? How will you, as our nation's top librarian and archivist, make sure that our data remains available to us?
Do you want to do the, is that 20 seconds or 20
Let me start with the web harvesting, because
20 minutes.
that's a hot topic. And we both are represented in a task force, national task force on web harvesting, because it's an issue. The work that you just cited with the Internet Archive is kind of, not scattershot, but it's selective, I'll say, and it captures a moments in time for a very select group of agencies. It doesn't meet the test for true web archiving, which is the reason we have this task force looking at this. Do you want to say anything about?
Well, I think you are touching on some important issues with the aspect of technology and being able to even keep up with the technologies of the future as we start digitizing some of the materials, and how do we make sure that we have the funding to get to the next generation of technology, to all of the work that's been done can transfer, and that's something that we're really working on now. What's our digital strategy? What's our long-term? You still have to have it in the library's instance. In the case of the library, you have, and you have it too, you have the original document. So you have to be concerned about security in that sense. Where's a strike zone? Where do you do, what are the things that if anything happened physically, you will make sure you take first? And then that digital.
But let me address the taking down of stuff,
Yeah, that's
taking stuff
yours.
off of websites. We may not have been very public about our concern about that, but every time we see something cited in the press, we contact the agency to ensure that it may be off the website, but it's still retained, it's still available. So that's part of the vigilance that we provide on the executive branch, covered by the Federal Records Act, which monitors, which provides the framework for that. But the first question was about, remind me what the first question. Even though encryption, my favorite topic, yeah. So 2 sets of laws guide our work, and my legal counsel is here, so he'll jump up and scream if I say the wrong thing.
You
Two
can
sets
count
of-
on that.
2 sets of laws, Presidential Records Act and Federal Records Act. Federal Records Act, we have teeth in the Federal Records Act, in the Presidential Records Act. We have the opportunity to provide guidance to the White House on how records management takes place. We have, so we provide the guidance. We have been assured that the encryption, the encrypted stuff, the way the laws are written is that individuals, and you've seen examples over the last couple of years of problems with email in one way or another. Personal servers and encryption falls into the same kind of category, where it's okay to use those, but if you're doing government business, then you have a responsibility to ensure that that content, that government business content gets copied into your government account. And that's the stance that we've taken on both sides, both the presidential side and the federal agency side.
And you heard about some of the things we're working on together. They're more fun.
Yeah, well, it's Sunshine Week, so room for fun and less fun.
It's a little fun
Oh, yeah.
and less fun, and I think that balance is good too.
But it has gotten, to be honest, it's gotten very complicated.
So Jim Snyder from iSolid. So as we move away from an era of written correspondence, email correspondence becomes more important. And my question to you in general, and I have a specific on this, is how important actually is email correspondence? Of course, with the Hillary Clinton email thing, it sounds like it's very important. Certainly at a national level, you take this issue very seriously. But at a local level, I am amazed that when I'm doing research from the 60s and 70s, I can find correspondence. And despite you would think it would be more available than ever before, but because so many localities do not have email retention laws,
Yeah.
it is invisible.
Right.
It's no longer possible. And there is such contempt for email records at a local level. So you talked about the Gang of 3. What about the Gang of 50? All those state archives who treat email records, maybe not when they're with you, but in practice, it seems like with contempt. They're just not there. There's such a higher standard at the federal level, you never know it than at the state
Wait
level.
a minute, don't throw those people
Okay.
under a bus.
Okay,
Those,
good.
Those
It's-
state
and-
archivists feel as passionately as I do about the
Yes.
importance of those as record. It's the state legislatures that have not supported them in their work.
And that's as simple as that. I think there's.
I meet with them on a regular basis. I know how they care about this.
Yeah, so
And
you
think-
feel it's important, but it just did not
yeah,
happen.
definitely.
Yeah,
But
it's very
people
sad.
didn't know it was that important
Yeah.
20 years ago, 15 years ago, or that those would be the records and that. So that's what
Yeah.
we're in this stage of everybody's trying to figure out. When you type something in and say somebody's a jerk.
I was
It's not
I
quite
believe
it.
I was at MIT when Mitt Romney left the governorship of Massachusetts, and the last thing he did was to scrub his email. And archives was never even on my radar screen, and I was incensed that he had done that. That was my first introduction to the fact that Massachusetts, as most states, has a law that allows that to happen.
So, thanks for being here and answering some questions, first of all. But I have a quick and dirty question, if you will, from a reporter who lives on the West Coast and couldn't make it here today. But then I'll have my own question. This reporter is Jason Leopold. He does most of his work in FOIA, as do I. I'm also a journalist. Mr. Leopold would like to know, have either of your offices received any instructions from this administration on how to handle FOIA? And do you expect Jeffrey Sessions to issue a new FOIA memo?
No,
That's a good question.
for the first one.
I'm not aware
No.
of any communication, Gary. No. No.
And I didn't bring my law colleagues with me from Library of Congress, but nothing's come to my attention. That's that.
Okay, all right, thank you. My own question is for Mr. Ferriero, is that how you pronounce your name?
Mario.
Ferriero, okay. Well, you were likely near the top of the MIT library system in late 2010 when Aaron Swartz, then a researcher at Harvard and MIT, started a project wherein he downloaded a JSTOR court records en masse. For those who don't know, Mr. Swartz was arrested, and his subsequent harsh prosecution, which led to his suicide, unfortunately, has been widely derided as a misuse of the prosecutor's office. Mr. Ferriero, MIT at the time had wide liberty to try to stop the prosecution and did not. Could you speak to what you recommended to the university at the time and speak to where you stand now on the closed system for documents of legal opinions and scientific research, much of which is publicly funded?
In 2010, I was here at the National Archives.
I
I left
thought you were.
MIT in 1996.
Okay.
That was
Right.
not, this didn't happen under my watch.
Well, could you maybe just comment on the accessibility of JSTOR and other scientific journals whose work is behind hefty paywalls, but whose research was funded by the public?
I'm, personally, I think anything that has government funding should be available to the public.
This gentleman.
Hi, thank you very much for your remarks. My name is Andrew Bergman. I'm a member of a new organization called the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. We've been working closely with the Internet Archive, actually, so I'm going to bug you. I apologize a little bit more based on one of Alex's questions. I'm wondering, sort of based on what you said, when you get in contact with agencies, I guess, it is very important that information, when it's removed from the internet, is still present somewhere. But unfortunately, often when it is removed from the internet, whether or not it's stored somewhere in the Internet Archive, it's still not available, in all the places, the URLs that you could access it before, maybe some local school linked something important on an EPA or DOE website, and it's no longer available there. So while it's great that it's archived, I'm wondering if you could speak to how you talk with the agencies about the unfortunate loss of accessibility when something is taken down, even if it is important that it's archived. And I guess my second point is, this is something that within the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative we're working on, is and we're actually working closely with the Internet Archive to expand, not just to be able to see old records and old web pages, but to actually start to analyze any changes. Because I think an important part of accessibility is not just seeing, millions and millions of web pages out there, even though, as you said, it is an incomplete record that's being stored on the Internet Archive, but it's actually to be able to understand what sorts of differences are and what those things mean. So I think your collaboration together probably provides an amazing opportunity to start actually providing the public insight into significance of these types of changes.
On the first part of your question, can you respond to that, Jay, about the conversations, the process that we use when we discover that perhaps something is missing?
And as
Jay
he's
Traynor
getting to
is,
the mic, I just want to say it's fascinating to listen to all of this because, not that I'm a Luddite, there's that new book, The Revenge of Analog. Technology is a wonderful tool, but it has opened up so many issues and challenges as we move forward in the information industry and world that I don't think that most people really appreciate what it has. It's wonderful what it does open up.
So
a
Jay
lot.
Trainer is in charge of Access Services, the exec for Access Services, and the Chief Records Officer reports to him, and it's through the Chief Records Officer that the contact is made with the agency.
Yes, so as the archivist has said, with agency services, we have OGIS, who's hosting today's event, but we also have the Office of the Chief Records Officer, where we work with agencies, first and foremost in the area that you're talking about, on the appraisal of records. All agencies create a records control schedule that tells us what records they're creating, how long those records need to be kept, what format they're in. Whether they make them available or not on the web may or may not impact the type of record that they are or the accessibility of that data. So when we're aware of these issues, we reach out to the agency to make sure that the record, in this case the data that you're talking about, was covered under the records control schedule and that they're maintaining it in the proper time frame. So you know, there's not always, whenever we're aware of this, we check into it, but there's not always an issue with that. You know, it's up to the agency while they own that information as to how they make it accessible.
And those record schedules are online, so you know, you can yourself, as an individual, go online to the agencies, to our site, where the record schedules are, and determine whether that stuff is record or not.
I apologize. I'll poke you about one other little detail. I think one thing that's come up, at least in our experience, although I am no legal expert at all, so I may be missing important things here, is that unfortunately there's sort of this gray area where sort of updates to websites. So we're talking something much simpler than data. We're talking like a sentence on like a nice public, you know, the Energy Information Administration's kids page can be removed. And I think my understanding is that often doesn't fall into the categories that you were discussing.
That's right.
And so I'm wondering if there are any efforts or any thoughts, either new legislation that could be proposed or something to try to get these sort of intermediate categories addressed in some way.
As I said, we're in new territory now.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
we have about, and the nice lady just put up 5 minutes, so
Sorry.
I don't know if we have
Thank you for your time.
But
a
I
Library
appreciate
of
your,
Congress
I appreciate your
question in
comments.
here. David, my jealousy and envy, you know, when I came in, the new store, the wonderful things you're doing, has been alleviated. So getting the world, you know, Woodrow Wilson's papers up for the World War I exhibit, I'm good. I like history.
So what is your philosophy regarding standardized metadata for documents? So
there we
with the
go.
Data Act, for example, we, for the first time, have government-wide standardized identifiers for government entities, and now we have federal IDs, so each federal worker has a unique identifier. Why not be able to search for a member of Congress by a unique identifier across all of your Gang of Three collections? And just, why not have some of these unique identifiers that are
Standard-
being
oh,
adopted?
Now,
I mean, what are you
must-
doing in this area?
Well,
Greatly facilitate public
metadata,
access.
yes.
Unique
And wouldn't it be what,
identifiers.
unique, and then all the search terms and Library of Congress, which is, you know, the birthplace of classification and the original search engines were those librarians at Library of Congress. And so we are all concerned.
We'll put that on our list
To-do
of
list.
collaborative projects.
But to be able to have universal, and don't forget international
Yeah.
search terms,
Right.
and oh, yes.
Right.
Translating, and then if you put one thing, yeah, that's our dream. And we're all
we're at
working
the end.
together, and we're at the end, but thank you for
But
bringing
before we
that up.
end, James Holzer is in the audience too. I just noticed him. I just want to acknowledge him. James, would you stand up and?
We're gonna clap.
So Miriam, James, and Alina are the geniuses behind what makes OGIS work. So thanks for being here. Thanks to all of you for being here also.
Thank you.
And thanks to you.
Can I take my water?
Thank you again, Dr. Hayden, and thank you, David, for kicking off today's celebration. It's really wonderful to hear from esteemed leaders in the field, and you've given all of us a lot to think about. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but hopefully you'll have an opportunity to ask some of our panelists as we proceed with our day. If you're interested in helping the National Archives make our records more accessible, Sunshine Week is a great time to become a citizen archivist. If you visit our Citizen Archivist dashboard this week, you will see a special transcription challenge in honor of Sunshine Week. Log on and help us see how many pages of recently declassified and historical federal agency records we can transcribe. So we're, I think, on schedule, back on schedule. I am very pleased to invite our first panel up to the stage, and I would like to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce the remaining panelist members. As many of you know, last year we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the FOIA signing by President Johnson. Today we are joined by several notable experts who will discuss FOIA's first 50 years and the importance of the bedrock open government law. Let me introduce to you the moderator of our panel, FOIA After 50, Mr. Tom Sussman, and then I'll turn the program over to him. Tom is currently the director of the Governmental Affairs Office at the American Bar Association, a position he has held since 2008. He joined the ABA after 27 years as a partner in the law firm of Ropes and Gray. Before that, he was chief counsel to the Senate Subcommittee on Administrative Practice and Procedure and held other government positions. Tom's involvement with FOIA began when, as a member of the U.S. Department of Justice in 1968, he advised federal agencies regarding the new law. In his Senate position, he was the principal staff lawyer for enactment of the 1974 FOIA amendments. At Ropes and Gray, he handled many FOIA-related litigation and regulatory matters, including the work that resulted in the issuance of President Reagan's executive order requiring agencies to give notice to submitters before releasing confidential business information. At the ABA, Tom has continued his leading role in addressing FOIA matters. He is founding president and a board member of the DC Open Government Coalition, on the board of the National Freedom of Information Coalition, on the steering committee of openthegovernment.org, and has served on many other relevant boards. Currently, Tom is serving as a member of the National Archives FOIA Federal Advisory Committee. Tom has often testified, addressed conferences, and taught on FOIA and related subjects. He was inducted into the Freedom of Information Hall of Fame in 2007. In 2008, he received the first FOIA Legend Award from the American University, and in 2009, he received the James Madison Award from the American Library Association as a champion of access to government information. Tom holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Yale University and a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Texas School of Law. Tom, thank you for bringing today's panelists together. I'll now turn it over to you. Thanks.
That was a little longer than the 3 sentences I sent you for an introduction.
I embellished a little bit.
Welcome. It's a delight for me to be here, and I think I have been almost 50 years with the Freedom of Information Act. Last year we did a number of programs, FOIA at 50, FOIA for Freedom of Information Act, looking back, looking at the history, at the origin, and operation of the law during its early years. Today the title of the panel is FOIA After 50, so we're going to take a look at the law and how it's been administered, but we're also going to focus on the present and the future. And take a temperature of FOIA at 50 and see what's ahead. Congress enacted that wonderful law after a decade of frustration of trying to get information from the executive branch. Media representatives decried the bureaucracy's obfuscation and obstruction. The American Society of Newspaper Editors commissioned a book called The People's Right to Know by media attorney Harold Cross. And John Moss came on the scene with subcommittee oversight that lasted almost a decade, during which time he was able to reveal the important sensitive nature of classified information such as telephone directories and newspaper clippings. And after Moss's efforts, finally, in 1966, the Freedom of Information Act was passed into law. President Johnson was sitting in his ranch in Texas, and a lot of this wonderful historical material is up on the National Security Archives website. He was given two alternative statements, a veto statement prepared by Attorney General Nick Katzenbach, who was representing all the agencies that unanimously recommended a veto of the original FOIA. Johnson was a bit troubled by his public media presence. This was during the Vietnam War and during, I guess, a low level of popularity for the president. And so he took his press secretary Bill Moyer's advice and signed the bill into law with a lot of laudatory remarks. And although there had been a constitutional right in Sweden to information, this was really the first full-fledged legislated right to information with enforcement. It was subject to certain exemptions that were specifically set out in the law, but the initial act proved basically ineffective. Ralph Nader is going to join us hopefully in a little while. Ralph wrote an article in a law review saying that this was the Freedom from Information Act. And Congress, after a period of oversight hearings and legislative hearings, which is the second time I was involved in the Justice Department right after the law went into effect. Congress enacted the 1974 amendments to the act, which gave it teeth. And every decade since, up through last year, Congress has adjusted the knobs, passed new legislation, and each time strengthened the public's right of access and the institutions and processes that give rise to the public's ability to get information from government. Before turning to my colleagues on the panel and welcome Ralph, I'll introduce each of them in a minute. I want to make a couple of observations to set the stage. The first relates to FOIA as an inspiration for the rest of the world. While some countries have built on our model and developed a more robust and more efficient and more transparent system, the fact is that our 50-year-old model stands as a beacon that still guides states and nations in developing enforceable rights to information for the public. And through an open government partnership, the United States has tried to enforce that and strengthen that right in other countries as well. My second point is that despite complaints by media, civil society, the business community, well, consumer advocates, media, civil society, about how FOIA actually works, the fact is a lot is accomplished through this remarkable law. The latest year for which data are available, over 700,000 FOIA requests were filed and less than 8% denied in full. I had a parenthetical keeping in mind that denial in part can mean no useful information is disclosed, but nonetheless, that's still a fairly high percentage. Over an 8-year period, 5 million requests were made. And we now take for granted such things as advisory opinions, inspection reports, material from the FTC and the Justice Department, the SEC, land records, custom records. All of these things are now routinely published, made available, data sets. Many of these that we now turn to on a routine basis didn't get there at agency initiative. They got there because of persistence by requesters who went to court, and courts forced the agencies initially to make this information available. Revelations by Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks may grab the headlines, but FOIA continues to be an indispensable and, in many ways, for the public, effective tool for opening the treasure troves of government. But that's not the question we're looking at today. Today we want to know where do we go from here? One thing I want to point out, and it was raised about perhaps in part by an earlier question, President Trump has rolled back dozens of mandates and executive orders of the prior administration. But two he has let stand are President Obama's memorandum to agency heads signed on his first day of office, mandating greater transparency, and a little later that year an executive order lowering barriers to public access to presidential records. So we start with the good news. On the other hand, just this morning, across the transom comes a report by the Knight Foundation called Forecasting Freedom of Information. And though I hadn't had a chance to digest all of its 52 pages, point number 3 in its conclusions did catch my attention. Overwhelmingly, experts predicted that access will get worse. Nearly 9 out of 10 predict that access to government will worsen because of the new presidential administration. Okay, what does this mean for FOIA after 50? We now turn to our panelists. Opening the discussion, if you're ready for us, Ralph, is Ralph Nader, lawyer, author, indefatigable consumer expert who I met
Thank you.
50 years ago?
Okay.
50 years ago. Well,
Carla
goodness.
was complaining about these age
Yeah,
things.
but I was thinking about that. We met in the department, when I was in the Department of Justice, and then worked closely together to see the Freedom of Information Act amendments adopted. Ralph was the first to generally use, and Nader's Raiders used the FOIA as a very effective tool in peeling back the cloak of secrecy in agency after agency, and came out with reports showing how government works and doesn't work. In the 70s, as I said, Ralph was active in helping promote improvement of the law and continues to lead as a consumer advocate and be a outspoken voice against government waste, fraud, abuse, and lack of accountability. He's going to be followed by Lucy Dalglish, who is Dean of the Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland, former Executive Director of the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. I guess that's where we met, on the board of the National Freedom of Information Center, where we also jointly served. And she decided to retire from active service into the academy, which I understand is actually a lot more stressful than being in general media. But Lucy is, as a former journalist and practicing lawyer, dedicated her career to protecting the public's right to know, advancing the First Amendment right, and safeguarding freedom of the press. And finally, Tom Blanton will round out our discussion. Director of the National Security Archive, a journalist, historian, advocate, author. Tom has worked to lead to the disclosure of vast stores of documents, not just disclosure, but analysis and promotion of availability, both here and abroad on important historical events like the Bay of Pigs, Vietnam, breakup of the Soviet Union, repressive regimes in Latin America, and a lot of things even going on at home. So again, thank you for being with us as we take a look at the Freedom of Information Act and how it is faring today and the prospects for the future. Ralph?
Thank you, Tom, for pulling this together. Thank you all for coming and the streamed audience. Wow. You're going to hear from real experts in this area, but I would like to pay tribute to Congressman John Moss, who indefatigably got this bill through in 1966 against incredible odds, the business community, the bureaucracy, excuse me, and Senator Ted Kennedy, who we worked with to vastly improve the Freedom of Information Act and the amendments in 1974, which also put in the critical provisions that gave the Freedom of Information Act some teeth and judicial review. Having said that, over the years, it's been very clear that information is the currency of democracy. And the Freedom of Information Enclave represents a major pillar of our democratic society at the federal, state, and local level, where there are freedom of information laws to be invoked, not just at the federal level. And given it is a pillar, the question is, how many people are working to make that pillar strong and usable and implementable full-time? Well, you have the National Security Archives and Tom Blanton, who's basically the major domo in this area, not only with the frequency of requests, but the comprehensiveness of them. He's not just requesting a file or a report. He pushes for improved systems by federal agencies and governments. I want to start with the usage. Excuse me, how many people here have used the Free Information Act? Okay, this is a real pre-selected audience, right? When you ask 1,000 college students or 1,000 citizen groups in an auditorium, you don't get many hands up in the air. Partly because the free information request is a specialty now, how you write the letter, and it's usually reposited in one person's hands. Like at our center, it's in the hands of John Richard, who has made many freedom of information requests. But we think that a basic skill of citizenship in this country should be knowledge about how to use the Free Information Act, and it should start in high school. And at our high school, the Gilbert School in Winston, Connecticut, we've had for many years, under the supervision and initiative of my sister, Dr. Clara Nader, and our community lawyer, Charlene Lavoie, a contest in high school where the teachers, in effect, show the students how to file a Free Information Act, often to the state government, for some file or some report or for some study. And then they write about it, and there's a contest, and the top 3 people get a prize, students. Now that should be part of high school, right? That should be part of high school education, because it isn't just that they learn how to get information that's denied often very improperly the public, where you shouldn't even have to have a FOIA request, but they see that it empowers them, number one. Number two, it gets them interested in government because they have a personal connection. They got a personal reply, either an affirmative or a denial. And so it's a foot in the door out of the realm of civic apathy and powerlessness to really get them going to the next step and the next step. And sometimes, actually, they go to the college and they expand on the free information subject that they have pursued in their college courses. So imagine thousands of high schools teaching this. What in the world is the objection? There is no objection. What's the opposition? What could be the opposition that would have any credibility? So here it is, another pathway to strengthening our democracy and civic participation that has no known adversary except no known adversary, right? Is it lethargy? Does it require more course materials that are costly? Does it require erecting a building on the high school campus? No. Teachers can learn it very quickly, and the students can learn it as part of their civics course or government course or whatever. Imagine the students using this in Flint, Michigan, before the exposure of the deadly lead in the drinking water. Because one of the FOIA requests, if it's not public, under the Drinking Water Act in the 1970s, was that you had a right to get information about the tests in the local drinking water. And if they're fudging it or they're not fully reporting the heavy metals and bacteria and viruses, et cetera, you can go after what is kept secret. So we need massive expansion of usage, massive. You take all the FOIA requests that have been recognized. It isn't even the tip of the iceberg of what's in the federal, state, and local governments, historically and in a contemporary sense, not the tip of the iceberg. And the nice thing about implemented freedom of information requests is it gets the media involved. Look at all the media the National Security Archives have got. Look at all the media the ACLU has gotten with its brilliantly targeted and very controversial subjects that they're trying to get sunlight in on in their pursuit of lawlessness in government and invasions of privacy and national security violations, violations of the Constitution. That kind of publicity has gotten the ACLU the kind of recognition publicly that has led to a very large expansion recently of its budget and its staff. So the Free Information Act, when it's heavily used, can even be seen as a jobs program. How about that one? And the flight of the imagination that can accrete to rolling out the consequences of using creatively, steadfastly, by massive numbers of people and youngsters in the country of the Free Information Act is limitless. It's just limitless. I think we should have groups funded by foundations, for example, that all over the country, that just sit full-time and try to figure out what is in the government's files and archives that no one is considering, no one has imagined, and just go into another level of free information penetration that is beyond what subjects happen to be reported or what controversies or what protests provoke the first layer of freedom of information. Now, moving from usage, very briefly, and the reason I can be brief is I'm going to quote something from the National Security Archive in terms of testimony in 2015, and they say there are three major barriers to getting information. One are the agency's unnecessary use of FOIA fees. Like you make a request, and if you're not a press or you don't have a website or whatever, they say, okay, it's going to cost you hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars. This was responded to when we made a free information request about the supersonic airplane many years ago. And the FAA said, hey, you want information in the supersonic airplane? Here's a warehouse of information. Come on in and find it. And a case was won where the judge said, not so fast, FAA. You have to index your information. You can't just throw a warehouse and have somebody try to spend 10 years ferreting out what they're looking for. You got to put the information in shape. Anyway, the problem of fees is not so much all the money, it's the intimidation. It's the deterrence. I think the fees added in 1 year about $4.5 million. And the overall amount of money that the federal government has spent processing free information requests is less than $500 million. You know what less than $500 million is? It's less than what we spend in any given recent year guarding the staff at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. How about that? One embassy and its staff, contracted out, cost 3 years ago in 1 year about $600 million. Talk about priorities. Free information saves lives. When you get disclosed meat and poultry reports about dirty meat and poultry plants, when you disclose suppressed information dealing with healthcare and nursing homes, you're talking about saving lives here. You're talking about improving health and safety. You're talking about deterring other similar nursing homes or meat and poultry plants from pursuing the dirty meat, especially in low-income areas where they are sold. The second barrier is the increasing trend, I'm quoting, the increasing trend of agencies using freedom of information exemptions, often exemption 5, which is interagency memos, to censor embarrassing or inconvenient information should be released. And the third barrier is the inability of the federal government to harness technology to process freedom of information requests and post freedom of information releases online so the public can have access to these release records more quickly. That will reduce a lot of the difficulty, time, fees, barriers. They just put it up there, and not even have to make people make freedom of information requests. Finally, I just want to say that we have to make this subject exciting. You know, when things are dull, they're not used. When I started going after the auto industry, the subject of traffic safety was made so dull, nobody was interested in studying it at universities, because it was all the driver's fault. It was the nut behind the wheel. It never was the highway, the vehicle, the interactions between driver, vehicle, and highway. And you have to make it exciting. And thank goodness, General Motors made it very exciting. They put private detectives on my tail, all the way to Congress to get some dirt on me, and they were caught by the guards in the U.S. Congress. And the press had a lot of material to report. So we have to make freedom of information requests really exciting in terms of the content that it can produce. And it produces content that relates to everybody's daily life, daily dreams, daily fears, daily aspirations, daily opportunities. And so I hope that the people watching this, the people in this audience, will go out with a much more expanded vision of what freedom of information means, how it connects to knowledge, how knowledge connects to judgment, how judgment connects to wisdom, and you've got a deliberative democracy underway, one that is not composed of people who are so demoralized that they make excuses for themselves for not voting and not going to a demonstration or a rally or a town meeting or a courtroom. That's what it's all about. And I'm very glad that Tom pointed out that the best freedom of information law before ours used to be in Sweden. And now I think ours is the best freedom of information law. And there may be a disagreement here.
There's a disagreement.
But it certainly, it certainly has huge amount of experience behind it. Let's put it that way, in terms of its benefits, how bureaucracies obstruct it. And it relates, of course, to whistleblowers and whistleblower rights, and Professor Robert Vaughan's book on all the laws in the world that are now on the books, often in authoritarian countries, protecting whistleblower rights was clearly as a form of demonstrable freedom of information. So I'm not used to introducing a subject with rosy characterization. There are a lot of problems emerging because there's a kind of boomerang that operates. The more successful free information initiatives are, the more creative the bureaucracies of secrecy and darkness become in thwarting it. And not just saying no to a Free Information Act, but putting information in such recesses of darkness and remoteness that people don't even know they exist in order to make a free information request. We have a free information clearinghouse at the Center for Responsive Law, and now it's at the litigation group of Public Citizen. And those of you who have really serious requests for freedom of information needs and are impecunious can go to the litigation group at Public Citizen, 202-588-1000, and ask for a free lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. how times have changed. When you talk about the $500 million and the amount it takes to guard the Baghdad industry, in the 70s, you used to use the comparable figure for FOIA administration as the amount of money the military spends on bands each year.
Yeah.
So I think the price has gone up, actually.
Yeah, it's over $1 billion.
Yeah. Lucy, it's time for you, and perhaps you'll give us some insights also. Ralph had made a great case for teaching high school students. I bet by the time they get to journalism school, they still haven't learned much about FOIA.
You know, it's kind of distressing when you're at a university and you realize that these students come in and they're brilliant these days. So many of them have studied all the STEM fields. They come in with science and with math. Their writing usually needs quite a bit of work, but what they have not gotten, Ralph is right, they've not gotten much civics education. And one of the things that always appealed to me about journalism was I considered myself to be a very patriotic American. And I always believed that transparency was needed for democracy, and I thought journalism was a way to do that. So that's among the values that we try to teach our young journalists. Every journalism student at Maryland has to take a media law class, and as part of the media law class, they have to make a FOIA request. Sometimes those are federal, sometimes they're state, sometimes we try to get them to mesh together, and it's a big project. And Ralph is right, the more exciting the subject matter, the happier they are. And I know this because I read all of their reviews at the end of the semester. When you ask them to make a request and they don't get a response, and they don't get it quickly, they feel demoralized, and they just think, who needs this? However, if you can give them something that's kind of edgy and cool, that they have a chance of getting something before the end of the semester, it really influences how they're going to use the law in the future. I, every semester or every year, talk to our group of visiting Hubert H. Humphrey Fellows. These are Fulbright journalists who come in and spend a year with us, and I give them a talk about the American media law landscape. And I was, just a few weeks ago, really hyping, freedom of information in the U.S., and this fellow from India raises his hand, and he said, yes, but I've been talking to American journalists. They say it's a disaster. I was like, yeah, most American journalists probably would tell you that, but for us, for journalists, one of the most frustrating things about federal FOIA is the length of time it takes. Journalists usually are on a deadline, and FOIA can be very, very frustrating. But I wanted to, I don't want to duplicate what Ralph has said, but I wanted to just raise a couple of issues also based on some of the questions from the previous panel. We need to, I don't know that we're ever going to get a handle entirely on technology, but some of the questions earlier had to do with how do we manage the way the government is now storing information. How are we managing that with requesting it? What are we getting? You explain it. When I got started in journalism, you would make a FOIA request, you would write a letter, and it would go to some agency, and they'd go through all this paper, and they'd send you back a bunch of paper, and a lot of it was blacked out, but at least you had an idea of what it was that the government had. And these days, because of technology, it's harder to know what to ask for because we don't really understand what they've got and how best to use it. And that is, in the future, only going to get a lot more complicated, and I'm certainly not a computer scientist. So you're not going to get an answer to that from me. But I do recognize that these are very, very important issues that if we want to have a more transparent society, we're going to have to figure out how to use that. Two more points that I would like to make. One being that when I was at the Reporters Committee, I did an enormous amount of work with state open records laws. I'm the former president of the National Freedom of Information Coalition. And if you think that federal FOIA can be kind of confusing, just imagine overlaying that with 50 different states. Some of them are quite good, and some of them, somebody mentioned earlier how scary it is in Massachusetts. So they do a better job in some places than others. But as we saw, federal FOIA was kind of a response to that post-World War II Cold War, can't get the agencies to give Congress any information. State laws, while there were a handful of them that existed before federal FOIA, state laws were really a product of Watergate. Most of them, if you look when the comprehensive laws were passed, 1973 and 1974, were very active. Then as we were amending and going along and people were complaining about the length of time it took to get a response and the fees that were charged and all of that, we were still kind of in a semi-steady state. 9/11 came along, and that was the last time I feel we were in a position like now. After 9/11, the federal government in particular put a lot of information off limits that we previously had access to. And so 15 years ago, we were really, really going through some trauma, and a lot of coalitions whose people are and members are in the room here became very, very active. I don't know what's going to happen, what Tom suggested about what we've not seen yet from the Trump administration. I'm kind of holding my breath. That may just be because things are chaotic and they haven't gotten to it yet. But Jeff Sessions understands FOIA, and we have really good amendments to FOIA that were passed last spring. But typically when a new law like that is passed, it's the Attorney General that writes a memorandum of some sort, I would think, about how that's going to be handled. And Sessions is not a Patrick Leahy or a Grassley. He doesn't have the same attitude toward FOIA that some of the big FOIA advocates have. So I'm a little bit apprehensive about what we might see coming from the Justice Department. And finally, and because now I'm an academic, we get a lot of surveys and polls and papers written about the impact of FOIA. There's a lot of government reporting that gets done. What I don't think we've seen in recent years, at least, is a scientifically conducted research project on government transparency. We have a lot of, one-shot projects that come out somehow tied to Sunshine Week, and they're great, and it gives you a pulse of what people are thinking. But I think it would be terrific if a big funder of some sort, the government or a foundation, were to come up with a scientific study using scientific principles and do an evaluation of where we are with government transparency and what it means and what the risks are. I can find someone to do it.
Thank you.
All right, Lucy.
Tom, I want to key off. I know you've got things you would like to say, but I want to take off on Lucy's comments on 9/11 as a turning point, because you've been very outspoken on why we should not be cowed by national security claims in closing the doors on government transparency. So I hope that was part of what you were planning to say.
Absolutely. I'll say what we said after 9/11, series of different studies and arguments, and we can prove it from the 9/11 committee's own investigation of 9/11, that one of the biggest problems that led to the breakdown of law enforcement and those hijackers getting away with what they got away with was our own excessive secrecy within the government. FBI wouldn't tell the CIA where somebody was in San Diego. CIA wouldn't tell the FBI. We tracked that guy in Malaysia. All that stuff, too much secrecy. We came up with a fun slogan after 9/11. Lucy will remember this. It was, we are not safer in the dark. It's just a fact. But where I wanted to go is to say a big thank you for the enthusiasm of Ralph, the inspiration of Lucy, Tom, who's been my guru on FOIA for years, David Ferriero for holding this event. It's become a tradition, 5 years now, Sunshine Week. Well, the National Security Archive, we have a tradition for Sunshine Week too, which is every Sunshine Week, we do a Freedom of Information audit of the federal government. How are agencies responding? How are they responding to FOIA requests? Have they come up to the standards we'd like to see them come up to? And what's fun here is our very first audit, Lucy mentioned the Attorney General's memo. There was a fellow named John Ashcroft who came in after 9/11, did a memo saying, if you can find a reason, telling federal agencies, any reason to deny a FOIA request, we'll back you up at the Justice Department. So we on the advocacy side and FOIA side said, wow, this might be the end of FOIA. And so we audited, asked all the agencies, show us what you did in response to Ashcroft's memo. Did you change your regs, your guidance, your training, your procedures, anything? Show us, give us a copy. And it was fascinating. There was only about 4 or 5 agencies that changed anything really substantive. One of them was the Air Force. Their general counsel sent a memo to all their components. This is the end of freedom of information as we know it. You don't have to answer anymore. It took us about 8 years of litigation to straighten that out. Most of the agencies, however, just took that Ashcroft memo and forwarded it off to their field offices. That's it. My favorites, however, were the 4 agencies who wrote us back. What Ashcroft memo was that? Could you send us a copy of that Attorney General memo? We must have been out of the office on that day or in the mailroom or something. Could you let us know what's going on? So the diversity of the federal government is also one of our protections as citizens. I just want to say that right up front. And I'll say a second thing about the amendments that passed last year. One of the motives for folks like us and openthegovernment.org and all the other folks who pushed those amendments was to make an Attorney General memo superfluous. By putting into the law the standards that we got on the first days of the Obama administration, presumption of openness, to put into the law better rights for requesters. And so on the new audit that we've just completed, and I got to do a shout out to Nate Jones and Lauren Harper, who really did the heavy lifting on tracking every one of the 99 agencies with a chief FOIA officer about which ones of them. Congress passed that law in June. Obama signed it in time for the 50th anniversary of the Freedom of Information Act. How many agencies actually, and it gave them a deadline, said in 180 days, you got to change your Freedom of Information regulations to give requesters at least 90 days, to refer people to OGIS, to mediate disputes, all the other good stuff. That's the Office of Government Information Services. That's the hotline. Okay. It's the Ombuds.
I'm
the
just
Ombuds.
getting past the acronym.
Ombuds Office Information, I would argue, and I'll come back to that. So this is the results of the audit. You see the green? There are 38 out of 99 agencies that actually did anything in response to Congress changing the law. Wow. Houston, we got a problem, right? The sponsors of that bill were a really unlikely cohort. You just run down the names: Grassley, Cornyn, Leahy, Chaffetz, Issa, Cummings. I don't think there's a single piece of legislation with that group of 6 listed on that anywhere, which is, well, maybe the Data Act. Oh, thank you, Alex. So there's some sunshine up there in Congress. I don't think that Chuck Grassley and John Cornyn and Pat Leahy are going to be real happy to find out that the agencies are thumbing their nose at the statutory changes that Congress put in that said, change your regulations. They had till December 27th to do it. Nate and Lauren are such kind-hearted people and work with agencies all the time that they gave everybody all the way up to March 8th. You could miss December 27th, but we'll give you to March 8th, and you'd still have a majority of the agencies, 3 out of 5, flunking. So that, I think, is the bad news. But let me just say the good news. In the last 2 weeks, the Freedom of Information Act has produced what? Those wonderful National Park Service crowd photographs of inaugurations going back the last few years that show that the 2017 inauguration was about 1/3 the size of the crowd of the Obama inaugurations. That's fascinating because it shows White House was lying. Another big freedom of information release showed the government was telling the truth. This is the FBI finally released the al-Awlaki files on the underwear bomber. Remember the guy on the plane to Detroit who had explosives in his underwear and just kind of blew up himself instead of blowing up the plane? But turns out he had been prepped, trained, inspired, debriefed, confessioned, everything by Anwar al-Awlaki, which basically those files suggest government was really telling the truth when they said, well, we're putting a drone attack on al-Awlaki, American citizen in Yemen, because he represents an imminent threat to you and me. That's fascinating. So we got one freedom of information release says the government lies, the president lies, the White House press secretary lies, and another freedom of information release that says, whoa, the president could tell the truth even about something as significant to our security as a drone attack abroad. It's fascinating. But then go on down the list of just in the last month. So the Oklahoma State Freedom of Information Act produced all the emails of the guy who's now the head of our Environmental Protection Agency, showing that the folks who wrote his press releases while he was Oklahoma's Attorney General were the oil companies. Well, that's a fascinating piece of accountability. That's something freedom of information needs to show. Or the Indiana State Freedom of Information law produced the emails showing that Mike Pence, as governor of Louisiana, routinely used private email server. Gosh, have I heard anything about a private email server in the last month and a half? Somehow it's just like that whole package of the media coverage has just fallen apart. Bottom line, and I should just say, can't miss this opportunity. Speaking of Mike Pence and private email servers, David, how's that project going on saving all the senior government officials' emails? I think that might be our next topic for a little, for some audit. The long and short is just simply for all the complaints you'll hear from journalists all the time about the delays and missing my deadlines, obfuscation, can't get through to the right number. It's not nearly as bad as it was in one of our previous FOIA audits where we found that the FOIA hotline was answered in the maternity ward at Wright-Patterson Air Base in Dayton, Ohio. Now you've got chief FOIA officers, you've got some people that you can hold accountable, and you've got a lot of folks, professional freedom of information officers and professionals at the Office of Government Information Services that you can talk to and try to work things out. We try to do it on a regular basis. That said, there are some real issues with our next 50 years. And I just want to come back to Ralph saying he still thought Sweden had the best. Ours was even better than Sweden. And I just wanted to throw out to you a data
Sweden
set.
had the best before ours.
Before ours, but now ours is the best. Yeah. I remember all those delegations of dissidents from Eastern Europe and human writers from Argentina and Moscow Helsinki group from Russia trooping into the National Security Archive back in 1989, 90, 91, 92, saying, how did you get that State Department cable of a transcript of our dictator's meeting with your Secretary of State? How did you get that? That's on the front page here in wherever, Kyrgyzstan. And we'd explain this Freedom of Information Act idea. And they'd go back and work up their own laws and their own archives laws, their own records laws. And we kept explaining freedom of information is not a silver bullet. It fits in a larger family of records laws. You got to have people who save the records. You got to have training for the people who create the records. You got to have freedom of information, and you got to deal with the electronic realities. They went back and they did all that. There were about 12 laws on the books. I think Tom Sussman's largely correct when he says ours in 1989 was, in certain ways, the only real law, request, enforceable by court, all that. Today, there are 111 countries and counting with some form of a statutory right of access to information. And our law ranks number 57 out of 111. This is Sunshine Week, so let's be frank and honest about this. Now, the raters do say our ordinary routine openness is better than probably many of those 57 that rank ahead of us, and that's absolutely true. But what's important to me about that rating is it says that two big things are wrong with our law, and that's what we need to work on as a Sunshine community over the next 50 years. And the two big things that are wrong with our law is that the Office of Government Information Service doesn't have the power to overrule a federal agency that's stonewalling a requester. And it needs it. The best laws in the world, places like Mexico, the Information Commission has a statutory ability to overrule even heresy. Would anybody believe it? The Attorney General. Second big thing that's wrong with our law is we don't really have much of a public interest or human rights override that says even when the information fits an exemption, there's a larger public purpose that Congress and the society have in mind when we embrace this freedom of information idea and accountable government idea. In Mexico, which rates number 1 on that scale, we're number 57, their Information Commission overruled the Attorney General to force the release of the investigative file on those 43 disappeared students because it triggered the human rights abuse and the cover-up components of the override that's in the Mexican law. And the parents of the students got to show it was correct. The Attorney General was covering it up. Fascinating. In our system, the Attorney General says it's a law enforcement investigation. That's the 7th exemption, and that's the end of the discussion. In fact, attorneys general in this country and FBI directors don't even talk about current investigations unless they're about Hillary Clinton. So we've got some work to do on our law and on our process, but a good place to start is to celebrate the incredible track record that we've already achieved in 50 years.
Excellent. All right. We do have time for questions. There are 2 mics, and while people are thinking about whether they want to ask a question or not, I want to ask Lucy and Ralph about transparency and the importance of government information in a post-truth era, especially when journalists are sort of confronting the notion of are they being sidelined for relevance by alternative medias, tweets going from politicians directly to the public, and public skepticism about the veracity and reliability of the mainstream media. That's your
Yeah.
bread and butter.
This is scary. I was at a very interesting conference last week in Phoenix, and put together by Facebook with help from Google and Microsoft and some other tech firms, and there were a lot of the news literacy community was in the room. And the one heartening thing about all of this is that the tech companies, which have always been rather standoffish and not, newspaper publishers and local broadcasters had always been part of their communities and took the lead when you needed to sue for public access to a record. They viewed themselves as supporters of a community. Well, these days, the tech companies are more and more involved in the dissemination of news and information. And they traditionally have not really wanted to get involved in content and issues surrounding content. That has changed, and I came back convinced that they really, really care about news literacy, and they know that this is going to present a problem for them. But I think this is the topic of our time. And news literacy is directly related to transparency. It's directly related to facts. I don't like the word truth. Truth is a little bit more subjective. I'd be satisfied if we could just actually get facts out there. And we are doubling down on this. Every year at Maryland, we teach 400 non-journalism students a media literacy class. And we need to branch out and do a better job of educating the public on how to discern facts from all the noise they're bombarded with every day. And it's not always very easy, but we have to get our arms around this, and I think most journalism deans and editors and producers of information and content managers and all the different names people have, I think they understand that we're not going to survive as a society unless we address these issues.
You want to add anything?
Well, this is a huge subject. And I've just written a little paperback called Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. And the premise is that throughout American history, and I'm sure other countries, the most major advances in social justice have never required more than 1% of the people being active in pursuing those advances, as long as they represent a majority opinion. And if you go back through American history, many times it's less than 1%. 1% of the adults in this country is 2.5 million people. And so why don't we just start with trying to get a serious sub-society underway. Instead of talking about reaching 50, 80, 90,000, 90 million people to cut off from Facebook or not give so many of their personal information, et cetera. Start with building that 1%. The minimum wage is a national issue. A lot of state and local governments have raised it. It's coming to Congress. And it didn't take more than 50,000 people picketing Walmart with the help of SEIU, McDonald's, and a few think tanks to make this an issue in the presidential campaign as well. So in order not to be totally overwhelmed, it can be very overwhelming. The new technology, I mean, within 4 years, you're going to see millions of people, many of them young, walking around with virtual reality goggles. You want to talk about fake news, right? Virtual reality, because there's only one major technical impediment now, and that is how do you reduce the nausea of three-dimensional reality. And Tony Fadell, who's one of the inventors of the smartphone, told me we're about 4 years now away from it becoming current. So let's just work on building that serious 1% in one area after another that are composed of regular people all over, neighborhoods, communities. They surprise us where they come from. And because they come from everywhere, they have their own circle. They have their own friends and relatives and neighbors who look up to them. They're often called the influentials by Madison Avenue. So, because I don't see Facebook and Microsoft and Google, they're trapped by the exudations of their own flamingly fast technological developments. They don't have a clue when they unleash things what the consequences are. And they haven't had from day one. They don't have a clue. They just know they're putting the product out, they can show it's exciting, and the rest of it is going to take care of itself. No. So I really wouldn't rely on them. I think we need a grassroots movement of the serious sub-society that can take command of this. Because eventually it's going to have to end up in Congress. First Amendment or not, it's going to have to end up in Congress. You have 4 major monopolies now redefined under our antitrust laws someday, we hope. You have Google, you have Facebook, you have Microsoft, and what's the other one?
LinkedIn, I don't know.
Apple.
Apple.
And Apple. And they're sloshing around toward each other, but basically they have a new kind of monopoly, just the way Amazon is developing a new kind of monopoly. This is not going to be, oh, don't mess with our First Amendment rights. Oh, no, no. This is going to go into the antitrust area, and it's going to go into legislation, and the sooner the better.
Ralph, I want to take a couple of questions, but I can't restrain myself from observing that it isn't the virtual reality, it's reality that sometimes nauseates me these days. Yes, ma'am. We'll start with the question.
Thanks for your presentation. The whole panel is interesting. My name is Li Yang. I just wonder if you can really address more about the credibility or reliability of the data and availability of data. Sometimes the data from agency to agency, they can shift around, transfer around, so it's basically not available. And then sometimes, as you mentioned, there are some kind of blackout, and just what percentage that you get is really meaningful and accurate. And whether the agency will, let's say from one agency, local to federal, they can be changing a lot of hands. And if you want to follow that, maybe you will take them not just millions of dollars, but also years and decades and still got nothing.
Yeah, I think we have the question. Thank you very much. Okay. Tom, credibility of data as the key issue.
It's a great question. We spent a lot of
Excellent.
time
Thank you.
at the National Security Archive reading through black blotches that cover up text on records and documents. And sometimes we find another version of the same document, and then we can see what's under there and what's not. You're talking about in the age of big data, these huge data sets, and how to verify and ensure the credibility. All I can say is we're going to have to fall back to a set of tools that have been developing for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that journalists have developed to check evidence, that historians have developed to weigh evidence against each other, that lawyers in our court system have developed to assess credibility of sources and the possibility of lack of authenticity. And I think those tools and those kind of going to basics apply in the big data area. It's just the volume is greater, the challenge is tougher, the programming and the algorithms are going to have to be more sophisticated. But to the extent we have any protection, even in this world of big data sets, is that the data sets are usually created to serve some kind of purpose. Like Medicare collects all that hospital operating data, how much they're charging for a hip replacement, because they got to know whether those reimbursements to hospitals are justified or not. But the hospitals wanted to keep that data closed because it showed that George Washington Hospital charged half as much as Georgetown Hospital charged for the same thing, which is the myth of the market when it comes to healthcare, because the prices are not evident anywhere. But those data sets were created for purposes, and as long as you as the reader and the investigator understand those purposes, understand the ways they can be changed, and weigh them off against other forms of evidence where you can test, that's your only real check.
Well, and your bottom line is that transparency of the data is really
the only
most
real
important.
guarantee.
Then the public becomes the fact
The check.
checker. Right.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
So my question is, what do you think of the exemption for government employee compensation, especially benefits and deferred compensation? So in many local governments, as much as 80% of the budget is compensation. And basically, the benefits and deferred compensation component is completely invisible. It's exempt from FOIA. And even the salary part, which is normally nominally public, is in effect inaccessible in many jurisdictions. So this is really more of a local and state, but I think it also applies at a federal level, as increasingly compensation is not salary, but in these other forms that are exempt, and generally most Americans think they should be exempt. I happen to disagree, and I've done a series in the Washington Post, op-ed pages, the local ones, on this subject. I think it's a problem. Again, when you're up to 80% of compensation and about 50% of it now is often basically invisible. What do you think of that exemption? Is that an acceptable exemption from the public's right to know or not?
I didn't know there was one.
Yeah, it depends on what state you're in. I work in a state where anybody can, you pull out your iPhone, you can tell me, you can look up, you'll find my salary.
Salary.
I work
Will we
in
be
Maryland.
disappointed?
There's also a formula you can easily figure out what my benefits package would be. So I can tell you that it's all public. What do I care? The world doesn't come to an end when people know what my salary is and what my benefits package is. It should be public. There's no excuse for it not being public.
I think we all agree about that. Now, there's a big sign in front of me that says end.
Oh, really quick, one-word answer.
I get a frown from there. Go, quick, very quick.
Should Congress be subject to FOIA?
Yes.
Yes.
No,
Thank you.
He says no.
no. I mean, my view is, tell me what you want other than CRS reports from Congress, and you probably can get them.
That'd be a good place to start.
That would
Well,
be a good
okay,
place
but that's
to
not
start.
Congress applying the FOIA to Congress. That's making certain data sets. In any event, Ralph, Lucy, Tom, thank you very much. Otis, thank you for inviting us, and we'll be glad to come back next year and do this again.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks.
Ralph.
Very-
So we're going to take a break, 15 minutes, so we can actually move on with our exciting afternoon program. Please try to come back on time, 3:15. If you want to purchase food or drink from the Charters Cafe, it's located on this level. but please remember, no food or drink back in the auditorium. Also, there are restrooms directly outside the theater and another set downstairs by the cafe. So please come back at 3:15. All right, so welcome back, everyone. I am very pleased to be able to introduce the next features in our agenda. The first set of recorded comments are from the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, Representative Jason Chaffetz. Representative Chaffetz, currently in his fourth term, has served Utah's 3rd congressional district since January 6, 2009. He became the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform in January 2015. He also serves on the House Judiciary Committee. Chairman Chaffetz and his colleagues on the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, along with his colleagues on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Tom referenced this in the earlier panel, championed the 2016 successful bipartisan effort to amend the Freedom of Information Act, resulting in the 2016 passage of the FOIA Improvement Act. So hopefully now we can roll Representative Chaffetz's clip.
Hi, I'm Jason Chaffetz, the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. I want to congratulate you for being here for Sunshine Week, and I appreciate everything that the National Archives does. We've got great men and women who really serve their country and play such an important role in our government. And as you celebrate and participate in Sunshine Week, I want you to know you've got great partners on both sides of the aisle in the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. As you know, the Freedom of Information Act is one of the most important tools that was implemented back in the 1950s. And through the years, the way we store things and archive things has changed. And certainly in this digital age, we're in a whole new realm where things move much faster, much swifter, and in a lot of different mediums. You also know that the Freedom of Information Act in the last Congress was updated, and there were a lot of good reforms, I think, to provide people, the public in particular, access to its own government records, and that's the way it should be. But there's still a number of challenges that we're working on. For instance, in the year 2015, there were more than 700,000 requests under the Freedom of Information Act, yet roughly 60% of those requests were rejected by the government. So we need to tackle that and look at it. I'm sure there are duplicate requests. I'm sure there are things that people were asking for that are perhaps classified in their nature. But when you have more than half of the requests ultimately rejected for a variety of exemptions, that's something that we're keenly aware of and that we have to tackle and resolve. But this is where we need your help. We need your participation. And technology, as I said before, is going to continue to change and evolve. And so when those new challenges come forward, we need to understand that in the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Because in this digital age, we want to make sure that people can get this information online. We want technology should be our friend. It should be swifter. It should be more prevalent. It should be easier to get to and to access. And so I appreciate your keen interest in this topic, and glad you're here participating. I'm sorry I couldn't personally be there with you, but again, thank you for hearing me out and for being here, and thanks for all you do.
Okay, next, I am very pleased to introduce recorded comments from the ranking member of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, Representative Elijah Cummings. Representative Cummings has represented Maryland's 7th congressional district since 1996. In addition to serving as the ranking member on the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, Representative Cummings also serves on the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Joint Economic Committee. Ranking member Cummings was the primary sponsor of the Presidential and Federal Records Act amendments of 2014, and along with his colleagues on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee and Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, led a bipartisan effort to update the nation's records laws for the 21st century, shining a spotlight on the challenges associated with managing electronic records. So now we're going to see the clip from
Thank you to the National Archives and Records Administration for hosting this Sunshine Week event. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, even though I'm not able to be with you in person. Many of you are passionate advocates for transparency, and I want to thank you for all you do. It is more important than ever that we have advocacy groups and government employees who are willing to fight for the public's right to know what the government is doing. One of the primary tools that we have available to hold the federal government accountable is the Freedom of Information Act. Last June, President Obama signed FOIA Improvement Act of 2016. This new law was the combination of several years of bipartisan efforts between Representative Darrell Issa, myself, Senator Leahy, and Senator Cornyn. One of the most important changes we made in the new law was to put into statute the presumption of openness. Now, when an agency is responding to a FOIA request, the agency may withhold information only if disclosure is prohibited by law or if the agency reasonably foresees that disclosure would harm an interest protected by one of the exemptions to FOIA. The new law also put into place a 25-year sunset on the deliberative process exemption. Tom Blanton from the National Security Archive testified in December that this new sunset provision has already resulted in the release of documents on the Bay of Pigs incident the CIA had hidden away for more than 50 years. The FOIA Improvement Act also strengthened the FOIA Ombudsman, the Office of Government Information Services. I'm eager to hear from those of you who are tasked with implementing the new law, as well as those of you who are using the new law to obtain information. For those of you who are agency FOIA professionals, I know you're doing a lot with a very little. I'm extremely concerned that President Trump's current hiring freeze could prevent agencies from fully staffing their FOIA offices. I am also concerned that further cuts to the agency's budget could impair the ability of agencies to implement FOIA effectively, especially in light of the additional requirements added by the new law. It is critical that agencies have the resources they need to implement FOIA and other open government laws. Please feel free to reach out to my office and share your success stories and your challenges. Again, thank you all again for your work to promote sunshine in government.
Grateful to Chairman Chaffetz and his staff, and to Ranking Member Cummings and his staff for providing us with both sets of those wonderful remarks. At this time, let me please invite our participants from our final panel of the afternoon to come to the stage and give them a chance to come up and get settled in as I introduce the moderator of the panel, who will then introduce the rest of the participants. As I noted at the beginning of the event, open government puts the public in the driver's seat of our government by encouraging understanding of an agency's actions and engagement with public officials. Our next panel, Government at Your Fingertips, includes individuals who are leveraging technology to enable the public to more easily and effectively interact with our government. I am particularly pleased to be able to introduce today's moderator for this panel, Miriam Nisbet. I will then turn the program over to her, but before I do, I'm going to just give a quick background of her wonderful career. She served as the first director of OGIS, as the archivist pointed out earlier, created the wonderful foundations that put OGIS on the path to where we find ourselves today. Prior to joining OGIS, Miriam served as the director of the Information Society Division of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, located in Paris, France. That was a hardship assignment. Prior to her UNESCO appointment, Miriam served as legislative counsel at the American Library Association, where she was responsible for intellectual property issues raised by the digital information environment. As special counsel for information policy at the National Archives, Miriam advised on legal issues concerning Federal Records Act, Presidential Records Act, FOIA, and Privacy Act. As the Deputy Director of the then Office of Information and Privacy at the Department of Justice, where I first met Miriam, she was responsible for final action on initial requests for FOIA and Privacy Act access for records of senior DOJ offices and defended agencies in federal court litigation involving FOIA and the Privacy Act. Miriam received the Sunshine in Government Award in 2014 and the American Society of Access Professionals President's Award for Distinguished Public Service in 2013. Miriam holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a Juris Doctor degree from the University of North Carolina School of Law. Miriam is a fitting moderator for this panel as one of the early supporters of an effort to build a multi-agency FOIA portal, and her experience as an instructor for a coaching program offered by GovLab at NYU, designed to promote civic engagement and innovation. Thank you for joining us today, Miriam. I look forward to listening to the panel's discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Alina. And I very much appreciate that kind introduction, and also David Ferrio's introduction earlier. I really enjoyed the discussion between the archivist and Carla Hayden, our new Librarian of Congress, and particularly enjoyed hearing them talk about what they called the power of connecting people to information, and trying to create an environment, create a culture to make that happen. It's interesting how FOIA, as the original open government law, has really long been at the forefront of trying to figure out that rather messy intersection of law and technology. You know, the 1996 amendments brought us the electronic FOIA, and yet agencies were still debating about whether to take email FOIA requests when the 2007 amendments were passed. Since then, of course, online portals like FOIA Online have increased enormously, certainly increased the number of requests that are made that way. And the FBI recently made headlines by announcing that effective March 1, its FOIA portal would take the place of email for receiving FOIA requests. There was a lot of anxiety about that, and I thought it was really interesting that apparently the FBI does have one of the last remaining fax machines in the world, and you still can make your requests that way. We have 4 panelists who are acknowledged champions of the public's right to knowing what its government is up to. They are perfectly poised to tell us about how technology, and I would say in the case of each of them, imagination, has helped make a real dramatic change in the way people are able to get access to government records. So we're going to hear from each of them, and we're still going to have time for some questions and answers before we leave at 4:30 and face the next snowmageddon, it sounds like. But anyway, we're all comfortable here in the quiet before the storm. And so let me introduce, starting with Seamus Kraft. These are going to be brief introductions, but for all of them, you can find out a lot of interesting information about their backgrounds by doing a quick search using technology. Seamus Kraft is the co-founder and executive director of the OpenGov Foundation, whose goal, or I should say one of its goals, is to create a 21st century U.S. Congress. So we're going to hear from Seamus about why it's not just the executive branch that needs help in boosting its tech know-how to deal with issues and demands of the digital age. Next to him is Adam Marshall, who is the Knight litigation attorney at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, in addition to filing amicus briefs and helping journalists with their records requests. I should say journalists and really anybody who's trying to use the FOIA. Adam is the driving force behind developing a comprehensive, collaborative, free resource about FOIA, all about FOIA, the FOIA Wiki. Michael Morrissey will be third. Michael founded the nonprofit FOIA site Muckrock in 2010. And I know from having worked a bit with Michael in the intervening years that it really has become quite an essential tool in assisting journalists and citizens to file FOIA, federal and state public access requests. Also, to be able to see the requests that other people have made and to look at the, I guess, million-plus records that have been released to Muckrock users. I also have had the privilege of working with Pam Wright, who is with the National Archives and Records Administration as its first and current Chief Innovation Officer. Pam launched many of the archive's social media platforms, really making them work, and created the crazily popular Citizen Archivist Dashboard, which now includes the History Hub, a support community for history enthusiasts, researchers, citizen archivists, family historians, and archival professionals. So Seamus, take it away.
Miriam.
Tell us what you're working on.
Before I take it away, I would like to recognize an OG, an open government OG in the room, and enlist everybody's help in wishing him a lovely happy birthday. Phil Ashlock, everybody. Phil Ashlock. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Phil. Happy birthday to you. Woo!
You're going to be very grateful that I did not join in that song. Happy birthday.
Well, there we are. Now, everybody's probably seen stories that have come out recently about a tidal wave of public engagement with Congress at various levels of anger or frustration. And one of the big recommendations coming out of it is if you want to be heard, truly listened to by your elected official, you should do one of two things. Show up in person, call on the phone. I think that's banana land. It's absolutely nuts. Whether it's true or not, because it is probably true, it's asking the wrong question and giving the wrong recommendation. Showing up in person, calling your congressman just to get through, that's the best technology, 1950 had to offer? We are in our digital age, as we've heard so much today, but we have a Congress that is struggling with technology and with the internet age. Everybody has a stake in a Congress that works as best as it can in the 21st century. But due to reasons of politics, and I loved how you said it, Miriam, problems of imagination, we have a Congress that, as Kathy McMorris-Rodgers likes to say, bears far more resemblance to the 19th century or the 20th century than it does to the 21st. This is a massive, massive, massive problem for everybody. To put some numbers on it, What other institution would see a skyrocketing workload and would respond to that workload by cutting its own resources and ability to do the job? That, ladies and gentlemen, as we know here in Washington, the belly of the beast, where 2 + 2 almost never equals 4, is the problem with the United States Congress. Increasing workload, but cutting our resources to deal with it. Something has to give. And the thing that has to give actually already has given out, right? We've seen healthcare.gov blow up, all in one fell swoop, lead to, thanks to imagination, an incredible response by the executive branch in the creation of highly talented teams of civic technologists, user experience designers, data scientists who came in and who fixed it for pennies on the dollars in months. Now, Congress has been in the middle of a slow motion healthcare.gov crisis for decades. So it makes the problem that much more insidious to solve. Now, it's not just the public, right? We're all familiar with the public approval numbers of Congress being somewhere, we are in the basement of the National Archives. It's the approval ratings are somewhere down below. But when you actually ask the folks, the hardworking men and women inside the institution, about their ability to meet the rising demand for civic engagement, just look at that. About 90% say they just don't have the tools to deal with it. But if you crunch the numbers like we have, and you can check them out at opengovfoundation.org, Congress is spending $300 million. It's actually more now. We've just finished the first draft of analysis of how the House spent its money in 2016. It's the House alone. So this $288 million is House and Senate. The House alone last year spent north of $200 million. Right? There's money there. There's a clear problem there. The public is not going away anytime soon, and thank goodness they're not. And so we've put together this idea, this plan for a congressional digital service. Now, we're not the first people to come up with this idea of a digital service. Thanks to President Obama's leadership, we have the US Digital Service. We have 18F. We have the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program. What Congress needs is a highly talented, directed SEAL team, if you will, or tiger team, if you will. Insert whatever fierce animal you would like. Team of technologists, data scientists, designers to come in and work with congressional offices to first and foremost identify the problems of the institutions. Some of them are internal and operational. Some of them are how workflows work, business process. Many don't even need a new tool to solve. But nobody knows what the real problems are. Nobody knows what an appropriate response time is, right? With FOIA, we've got numbers on how long it takes to get a response. Nobody's done that with constituent correspondence. If I call, what's an appropriate response look like? If I tweet, what's an appropriate response look like? Nobody even knows. And this is no longer a question of, do we need to build millions of new tools from scratch? The solutions, by and large, already exist. It's a question of having people outside of the partisan political process, inside the institution, working with those hardworking men and women, both technologists, folks like in the clerk's office or in the CAO's office, and the public to figure out the best way to achieve the mission of the Congress of the United States of America. It's not complicated, and I know in this town we like to assign blame. This is nobody's fault, but now that we know what the problem is and what the solution looks like, it's everybody's responsibility to step up and do something better for the United States Congress. And it's like we like to say, let's add some stripes to your stars. And if you'd like to find out more, find us on the internet, shoot me a note, come find me afterwards, and let's get ourselves the 21st century Congress we all sorely need. Thank you very much.
Okay. Seamus, one quick question for you before we pass on to Adam is, what do you think the likelihood is that we're going to see this?
I think it is, as much as one can say in this town, the likelihood that we see a congressional digital service happen in this Congress is very, very high. Now, one of the questions that I didn't touch on here is, where would it sit? So it needs to be outside of the political process, right? Outside of who controls what chamber. It needs to have the remit and the resources to work ledge branch wide. So now you're looking at ledge branch support type agencies. For example, like the Library of Congress might be a really good place. But I think that we've gotten to a place with the size and the scope of the problem and the snowplow work that has been done at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, that the chances that we see a Congressional Digital Service at least stood up, if not working, in this Congress are very, very good.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Adam,
All right.
tell us what you're working on.
So as Miriam said, my name is Adam Marshall. I'm an attorney at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And my job is basically to help reporters and journalists figure out how to do FOIA. And FOIA is something that I think is incredibly paradoxical in that the law exists for the public's benefit. It exists for all of us. It exists for us to know what the government is doing so we can participate in the democratic process. And yet FOIA is incredibly complicated. It is a nightmare. And I say this as someone who does FOIA pretty much every day, all day, more or less. It's really, really complicated. Last year at Sunshine Week, they had the original FOIA bill on display. And it was, I think, 2 pages long. And it basically said if you want something, you make a request for it. And the government gives it to you. And you know there are 9 exemptions, but that was it. 50 years later, the law itself is incredibly dense. If anyone wants to look up, Section 552A4, big letter A, Roman numeral 8, and then little a again, and then big Roman numeral 2, that is like a part of FOIA now. And I actually have no idea what it says. I kind of remembered this so I could give you this anecdote right now, but I don't even remember what the law says there. It's something about processing times, I think. But the law is incredibly complex. On top of that, you have 50 years of case law now interpreting FOIA by the courts, right? There are at least 16,000 or so cases from every district court in the nation up to the Supreme Court, and they all really change and interpret what FOIA means and how it works and how agencies deal with FOIA. So I find this very frustrating for the public and for reporters because they say, oh, okay, I want this document, and there's this massive history just underneath the surface that can inhibit their ability to get what they need to do their job to inform the public. At the same time, there are a lot of people out there who are really, really bright and who know a whole lot about FOIA. A lot of them are in this room. I'm sure a lot of them are watching. But the problem is that they are dispersed across, government, non-government, all around the country, all different types of groups like mine, other nonprofits, for-profit lawyers all over the place. And so what I wanted to do was come up with something that would allow all of those people to pool their knowledge together so that everyone in the public, reporters and citizens alike could benefit from their knowledge that up until now has been kind of, more or less locked away in one fashion or another. So the solution I came up with is something that has already existed for quite some time. It's a wiki. Wikipedia does exactly this. It takes people with expertise in all kinds of different areas, and it allows them to harness their collective knowledge, and so everyone can benefit from it. So I and the Reporters Committee and a bunch of other groups created. Oh, wait, are we working? I know the suspense is killing you here. Are we going to?
Come on.
Okay,
It is like waiting for your FOIA.
We may need some help here.
If we could advance the slides maybe next. I think that's a thing that they said.
Does everybody have my cell phone number? All right.
Am I on the right PowerPoint?
No.
Oh, we have to switch the PowerPoint. So we created the FOIA Wiki. I'll just go ahead. The FOIA Wiki is available to everyone. It's available at foia.wiki. That is the web address. And it does kind of exactly what I've been talking about here, which is that it allows everyone to contribute what they know about FOIA so that everyone can figure out exactly how the law works. It is primarily legal in nature. FOIA is a law, so you're going to have to know a little bit about case law. You're going to have to know a little bit about the statute in order to use it effectively. But you know, that's kind of the price of using FOIA. Oh, here we go. Here's the FOIA wiki. Yay!
Yay!
So it is run based on the same software that Wikipedia uses. They put out free open source software, which is great. So what we did is we took some of the resources that we had at the Reporters Committee already. We plugged them into the FOIA wiki. And then we started building partnerships with other groups, including Muckrock, Track, the National Security Archive, FOIA Mapper, and others to basically try to, like I said, to pool all of our resources together. So if you go to FOIA Wiki, this is the main page. This is what you'll get. We have, if you're just kind of starting out to FOIA, we have some introductory pages that aren't entirely filled with case law and statutory citations so that you don't get overwhelmed. But this kind of is a nice introduction to how the law is, how it works, what you can expect, that type of thing. But we also have a lot of detail for those who need it. And the chances are you probably will need a lot of detail when it comes to FOIA. So this is what we have so far, but this list is growing just about every week. There are all kinds of issues when it comes to FOIA, pre-litigation, post-litigation, administrative process, going to OGIS, fee issues, exemptions. There are all kinds of things going on. So here's fees. Actually, we have a nice chart that OGIS has provided already in here. But each page basically gives a short introduction about that area when it comes to FOIA, and then it gives a more detailed breakdown. It has citations and charts and all kinds of fun things. And anyone can contribute their knowledge and expertise, and in fact, a lot of people already are. We have all kinds of stuff about exemptions. Here's the page on Exemption 6, which covers privacy. One of the really cool things that I like about FOIA, the FOIA Wiki, is that we've worked with the FOIA project at Track, which is based up at the University of Syracuse, to pull in all of the recent court opinions about FOIA, which are dispersed all throughout PACER, which you have to pay for, which is not great. So instead, at the bottom of every page, you go to like the Exemption 6 page or the Exemption 7 page here, and you can get all of the recent cases about that topic. And better still, you get an annotation that tells you exactly what the issues were in that case and what the resolution was. This is all provided by Track, and we thank them for that. I think it's a really helpful resource. I actually use it all the time. We also have pages in the FOIA Wiki about every department and subdepartment and component in the federal government and how you can get in contact with them. So this is the DOJ page. Here you can see over on the right-hand column, we have like a link to their regs. We pull in real-time stats from Muckrock users. It shows like what kind of experience are people having when it comes to fees or processing time. We pull in all of the cases about that agency from the Track project. So you can see if you go to the Department of Commerce or the Department of Justice, you can see all of the cases, FOIA cases concerning that agency. And we also have links to FOIA Mapper, which is a great resource for explaining how agency record systems are organized so you can better formulate your requests. So there's just a ton of information in here. This slide shows a recent case against the Department of Justice. But I think it's really exciting. It's constantly growing. And the idea is that this will just become a permanent repository for everyone's knowledge about FOIA, and that over time, it will be the kind of go-to place for the requester community to figure out what the law says and what you can get. We also have a discussion board for those who have questions or thoughts or comments. It's kind of like a standard forum. You can post questions and receive answers there. So that is the FOIA Wiki. I encourage you to check it out, to sign up, to contribute whatever you have.
So, Adam, I mean, this is an amazing resource. How do you mediate the information that people want to give to you?
Yeah, so
it seems like you would have people needing to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to do this.
So I review most of the edits that come in, as do other people who have signed up already. It's the type of thing where I haven't seen a lot of people contributing poor or unhelpful information. It's mostly attorneys or people who are in the FOIA community who really know what they're talking about. And so with the exception of like one spammer, I think just about everything that's gone in, I looked and I'm like, that's great. I think that's really helpful. So we do have a review process in place. And so far it's been working fine. So I'm really encouraged by the response from the community.
Great. I know we're going to have lots of questions for everyone, so we'll move on to Michael. Do you have slides or no? You don't have slides.
Yep. Okay.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm the founder of Muckrock. We were founded in 2010. And we were really interested in sort of seeing what could we do to sort of, on the requester side, help modernize FOIA. Because at that time, fax machine at that time wasn't a novelty. It was sort of the predominant way a lot of requesters interacted with agencies. And so we said, well, I don't know how to change government. That seems really hard. We'll just build a wrapper around the entire government and fax all those requests to agencies ourselves. And since then, we've helped people file about 30,000 public records and FOIA requests at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. We filed hundreds of requests in almost every state at this point. And one of the things that I was really excited about was the name of this panel was Gov at Your Fingertips, which I think is a really wonderful image, and I think it's a really great image for right now. One of the things that we're seeing is that among the public, there's record low trust in our institutions, or not necessarily record low, but pretty low trust, near record low, not just in government institutions, but in media and all sorts of sort of traditional places that we've sort of seen as the bedrocks of a functioning society. The public says, I don't necessarily trust you anymore. I don't really believe you are acting in my best interest anymore. And we're seeing lots of challenging effects as a result of that. And so I think one of the things that can help turn that around is making the public feel that government is actually at their fingertips and make sure that when we have elected representatives, when we have a media, when we have people who are saying that they're acting in the public interest, the public feels that yes, they are, and yes, they are representative of me. And part of that challenge is that we've seen a lot of increasing expectations on agencies over the past few years, particularly in FOIA. I don't have any slides, so I'm just going to ask everybody to close your eyes real quick and imagine you're sitting at home, and if you have an Alexa sort of saying, hey, Alexa, get me directions to this place, and then Alexa gets back to you and says, sure thing, that'll take 7 or 8 months, and then I'll mail it to you in the mail. That would be pretty frustrating for people, but I think what we're seeing is an increasing mismatch between sort of what people expect out of their services when people put in an information request in through their Gmail account, into Siri, into all these other sources. They get an almost instantaneous response. And agencies working very hard with very limited resource are having a harder and harder time keeping up. And so as government responses get slower, expectations get higher, and it creates a lot of friction. And you know, I think one thing we're seeing is that over time, as we sort of have younger people want to get engaged and involved in government, we were talking earlier about sort of agencies are moving from fax to email to these digital portals. Meanwhile, the next generation, you know, barely uses email. Text is a little outmoded. I mean, everybody's trying to figure out how they can get to the next thing, and we're just catching up to email. And that's creating a lot of friction. And what we're seeing is that we're having a really hard time. Earlier in some of the earlier panels, they were talking about we need to get the newest generation excited about FOIA. We need to get kids excited about FOIA. And I do think that's possible. We have a little program we call FOIA for Kids internally, where we talk to high schools and we talk even with grade schools, except in Louisiana. You have to be 18 to file a request in Louisiana. But everywhere else, we work with grade schools to teach kids you have a right, not just a right, but a responsibility to understand what your government is up to. And one of the ways you can do this is through public records and the Freedom of Information Act. And then they're learning about fax machines, and they're totally befuddled, and we gotta start over again. But I think this challenge of mismatched resources opens up a real opportunity to sort of rethink the FOIA process. And one thing that I've seen in government recently and at the federal level, but also at the state and local level, is there's been a big rush of sort of digitizing these processes that have been around for decades. In some cases, we're digitizing processes that have been around since the 60s and 70s. One agency who will remain nameless, put together a FOIA app that sort of took their existing FOIA process and had about 40 different fields that you kind of had to punch through on a little iPhone app. And they were really excited about the digitization of their process, and it had all 1- and 2-star reviews. Because I think what people aren't looking for is 50 years of regulations put onto a 4-inch screen. What people are looking for is something that is accessible and meets them on their own terms. And I think when we look at the modernization of transparency and accountability and accessibility, it's really important to look back at sort of what are our basic democratic principles. And there's 5 principles as I've been thinking the past few months about sort of what can we do to engage another generation in transparency? What can we do to engage another generation in government and make them feel that they are stakeholders in this government? I don't think it's anything radical. It's not that we need to do better Twitter campaigns. We don't need the government investing a lot of money in Snapchat filters. We do need to go back to sort of our basic democratic principles. And the first one that kind of came to me was we need to make things accessible. And I think right now the FOIA community, one of the big discussions right now is 508 compliance and sort of making sure FOIA responses are accessible. And I think that's really important, is making sure that the FOIA process isn't just something that's open to sort of one group of people or another group of people, that is broadly accessible in those kind of terms, but also accessible in terms of being easy to understand. I don't think you should need to be a lawyer to file a request. I don't think you should need to be a government archivist to understand what a response means. There's a number of agencies, and I've always really loved this process, not the least because I've got about 7,000 pages from the FBI, 7,000 one-sheet copies, again and again. Every time they give a response, they give a little explanation of their overall FOIA process. Kind of say, hey, this is what you should take from this is what you shouldn't take from this is what you should understand. And I think that's a really great start, because I think one thing that we should look at is let's not just release information, but let's make sure we're releasing context around that. Or even better, making that context easy to find before the FOIA process even starts. Accessible means information that people need is where they expect to find it. One thing we've seen over the years is that government agencies are doing a much better job of putting information online. Some agencies, going back to the FBI's Vault, I think is a wonderful resource that ordinary citizens can kind of go in, understand, and get a lot of information without filing a new FOIA request, and that's tremendous. A lot of other agencies have good information online, but it's really buried. I remember a federal employee a while back was telling me the best way to find information on our website is use a Google site-specific search just for us, because our search isn't great, which I understand, because my own site search is a work in progress. It's challenging. But I think thinking more broadly of what can we do to get the information out there? What can we do to get the information people want into the places that they are? And don't just expect to be reactive to requests, but finding ways to go out into the public and make sure they have the information where they expect it. Going into these communities and engaging with them is part of being accessible. Collaborative. I think one of the great things about our democratic tradition here is it's a very collaborative tradition. We come together in times of crisis and times of joy to build something and to build a community. And I think one of the things that I would love to see about the FOIA process and transparency in general is make sure it's collaborative. Make sure that when somebody builds something, they have access to other people who are on that same journey. One of the things I like, one of my favorite examples is actually the National Archive, the Citizen Archivist Project, I think is a fantastic example of sort of inviting the public in some way to sort of participate together in sort of a larger goal. And I think examples like that, we've seen some agencies kind of do this sort of crowdsourcing, do this kind of engagement. And there's a real value to that beyond any of the individual tasks that are done or any of the individual questions that are done, and sort of making that more broadly accessible. With Muckrock, one of the collaborative decisions we made early on was sort of by making requests default public. And so somebody files a request, somebody gets back a response. Traditionally, that would go in a filing cabinet, never to be seen from again. And I think that's a real shame. By making these requests public, by making the results public, or even the rejections public, what we found is that years later, people can come back and learn something that might not have been immediately apparent, or put it in a new context where that value would come through again. Iterative. I think one thing that we talk a lot, everybody likes launches. Everybody likes big splashy debuts. But I think one thing that the transparency community still struggles with is sort of having iterative successes. I think one thing we've seen is that you never get it right the first time. And I think one thing that's really tough is that first time, there's always going to be a lot of critics out there. Sometimes I'm one of those critics, and I apologize. But I think one thing we need to do is sort of celebrate gradual improvements, learn from each other, and be willing to say, this is working, this is not working. Again, with the site, one thing we've tried to do over the years is we originally had a very complex wizard. We were like, let's be TurboTax for FOIA requests. So Muckrock had like a 7-step process that walked you through the FOIA request process. It was really nice, and that was a really good tagline until we remembered that nobody actually likes doing their taxes, even if they're using TurboTax. And so what we switched to was sort of an iterative model where instead of trying to go through this wizard process, you find something on the site that's interesting, you click clone, and then you have a new version of the site that you can tweak and submit on your own. And what we found is that our users build off each other's work. So what will happen is that somebody will file a request for some interesting local information. They'll get back something really interesting that changes a policy. And then somebody else in another state, another city, will file that same request in their own town and say, hey, that person inspired me to learn something, and figuring out how do we build these iterative processes into our efforts. And I think that's a really powerful part of our democratic experiment. I mean, one thing we've seen is that even the United States, even the amendments we have, we keep adding new ones occasionally, not very often. But I think sort of figuring out how do we sort of say, this is a process, and if you don't like where that process is today, that's great. That's called democracy. Get involved and help us continue to improve it. Transparent. And I think the only kind of real democracy is an informed one. And I think this is a really challenging issue these days of how do we make sure that people trust us? How do we put our cards on the table and let them understand what we're up to? And I think that takes a kind of courage, because it's very easy for me to say, oh, agencies should be very transparent. One thing that happens when you're transparent is you get criticized. One thing that happens when you're transparent is people will try and take what you do out of context and use it against you. And what I think the response has been the past few years is people have kind of closed down. And I don't think this is just government. I think throughout our society we have more manufactured marketing. We have more, we're a lot more careful about what we say, and people are a lot more guarded about how they talk, particularly about controversial issues. And what I think that's left is sort of people put up walls and they don't trust each other as much. But I think if we find ways to kind of push through that initial criticism, if we find ways to counter that criticism and say, hey, if you don't think what we're doing is the best way, tell us how we can improve, and we're going to take that into context. There are still going to be people who act in bad faith, but I think it's a more successful long-term way to go about things. And in FOIA, not everything can be transparent by default. I know particularly, for example, the IRS, we've been getting a lot of questions about when are we going to see certain people's tax returns. But there's really good reasons that certain tax returns or all tax returns are exempt from disclosure. But I think even when we're talking about private or sensitive information, being transparent about why that's private, be transparent about why that's sensitive, and explaining the reasoning behind when information is redacted or withheld, why it's redacted or withheld, that goes a long way towards building trust. And then the final thing that I would urge everybody to sort of think through is what can we do to continue to make not just transparency more participatory, but all of the work we try to do to improve government participatory. I think one thing we need to do is sort of figure out how do we get people engaged and involved. One thing over the past few months, we've seen an upswell in certain communities, people trying to say, I want to be involved in government, I want to be engaged. And like we heard, number one piece of advice they're told is A, donate to a nonprofit, B, show up to a rally, C, call a phone number. We need to find more productive ways to keep people engaged in government, to keep make sure their voices are heard and make sure they understand that their voices are heard all year round. And I think that will lead to rebuilding some of this trust in all of our institutions that really keeps our democracy working. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Pam, would you rather come to the podium?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to clunk across the stage.
Come on down.
Okay. That's good. Well, gosh, everything everybody said was so good on this panel.
Yeah.
And I titled my presentation, We the People, because we are looking at ways at the National Archives to really involve the public in the work that we do and to make them feel that the work that we do is part of the work they do, that we're not just there to deliver up to them some access to our records, but that people can work with us together to help create better access to all of our records, to repurpose our records in whatever way they want, to really engage with us. And so I'm talking a little bit today about some of the projects that we're doing that are pretty exciting. And I think I'm going to use this one, huh? Yeah. So in just the work that we're doing, we're not just looking at projects and kind of throwing them out there and hoping that people will like them. What we decided to do was actually use human-centric design principles to find out what people really want before we create it, and talk with them about some of the work that they might want to do. The guideposts for us are from open government principles of transparency, participation, and collaboration, and those kind of permeate everything that we're trying to do. We have a user experience working group that we just pulled together this last year to talk about what is it like for someone to use our website, to try to look at our records, to try to work with us. And it isn't always happy. It's a difficult thing to do, but it's embracing the cactus. It's like hugging the, you need to say, it's okay, tell me what you really hate, and we can work together to make it better. And you get scarred by that, but you go on. It's okay. So one of the cool things that we did was work with folks to create these user personas, and it's based on the data that we've collected from all of our Google Analytics and 4C customer satisfaction surveys and social media metrics, and actually talking to people. We've created some of the types of users that use our records and our website. What's cool about this is, I don't know if you've ever done user personas, but it really makes it like it's a person, and you're trying to make a life better for this lady or whoever it is that we're talking to. So we have veterans, teachers, students, genealogists, all kinds of folks that we're trying to please, and we're looking at what is it like for each one of these to use our records. So it's not only the cool new things that we're doing, but the way that we're doing them. I just wanted to say, too, for technology, one of the best things I think that's happened is we've moved into Drupal, finally, after wanting to do it for years. And I think other people have said this, too, that technology is difficult to do in the federal government, and we're trying to find ways kind of around some of it and ways to repurpose other technology that's super good. Why are we trying to build our own when there's stuff out there that we could use? The second thing is to make people aware that mobile is first. I mean, most people are coming to us from mobile. So this something that looks really great on your screen in your office, it is not enough. It's got to be mobile friendly, and so we've been doing that. It's been exciting. Another thing is looking at people, working with people where they are. There are zillions of people who are never going to come to the archives.gov on the website. They don't want to, they're not interested in us. So where can we go to get eyeballs on some of our stuff that for people that just would never want to come and see it themselves? And we had one of our staff start, he loves GIFs, and GIFs are kind of old technology, but it's new again. All the kids are loving it. And so I just let him go, and he created a bunch of GIFs. We have so many amazing things to create those with, and we got 27 million views in a month on our records on Giphy. And Giphy, you know, all the GIFs that you see online, that's the Facebook and Twitter, I think both use Giphy to pull GIFs out. So we just got a ton of views on our stuff, and you see things a little differently when you make it into a GIF and it moves a little bit, it brings a little life to the history, and kids are looking at things that they would never look at from our records. So I think it's exciting. It's also really exciting to listen to your staff when they have these ideas and you think, never in a million years, I'm not going to do that. And always check yourself if you're over 40 and say, okay, tell me it again, and how does this work? And always, that's the best ideas that come up. It's that exciting, when a staff is excited about something and they come and tell you something you've never heard before, it's gold. It's almost always gold. This is our National Archives catalog. It's our homepage. We started to put a document of the day kind of up on the homepage so that people would get a view into it kind of immediately. We have been working on this catalog for over a decade, and just this last year, I'm pleased to say that we got 95% of the records of the National Archives are described in this catalog now. It took us 15 years to do it, but we do it. We have it. We have 26 million digital objects available in the catalog, but we have so many more we need to put into it. And 16 million descriptions of our records. So that idea of having good context for the records, the metadata around it is vital to us. We have standards around the metadata, and we want people to understand that there's a hierarchy and there's a chain of provenance for these records. So you're not just looking at this at any website, you're looking at it at an authoritative website. However, it's the record that's interesting. And so a few years ago, we switched it. We used to have the description out in front and the records you could link to, but we really know you want to see a record of your Uncle Ted's homestead or whatever it is. And so we put the records out front, but we still have that hierarchy that's really important. So we started with this Citizen Archivist dashboard, and one of the reasons we started with that is because it takes so much money to update the catalog. And we just thought, can we do something quick and on a pilot on a website, much cheaper to do, and that's really how we started it. We threw in 1,000 pages into a little thing that one of my student staff persons put together, a little MacGyver thing. And we put it out there, and we thought 6 months, it would be worth 6 months of work. And in 2 weeks, the public transcribed everything. And not only that, there were 2 in foreign languages, Russian and French. Those were translated for us. We didn't even ask for that. So we knew it was cool. We knew it was really great. Learned a lot of lessons from that pilot, and we went back to the catalog and went through all the work of getting the catalog updated so that it could be kind of a social catalog. And I think we're the only archives that have done this. I think others look at us in horror that you would do this to your catalog, but so far so good. So we instituted tagging, transcription, and comments in our catalog in 2015. And so far we have 500,000 enhancements. These are things we could never do just on our own. It's the public going in there and adding transcriptions, adding tags, adding things we just don't have time to do. That then feeds the search engine so that the records are much more accessible. And the catalog gets better with all the additional information that we add to it, especially for handwritten documents. Oh, this is a neat guy. So he wrote to us, he wrote an email to us. I couldn't believe this, and really this was unsolicited and I didn't pay for it. It was really neat. He told us how much he enjoyed working. He's a retired guy. I won't read the whole thing. But he said, I'm really grateful for the imaginative ways you have allowed us citizens to take part in your extraordinary work. This is it. This is the good stuff. This is what we want. what I really would love for him to eventually feel is it's his work, you know, that we're in this together, and it's his government, and the work that he does is for himself and for the people. It's really neat. He's a cool guy. All right. We've done a lot of citizen scanning in the hub, so in our innovation hub, which is just on the other side of the building. And we've had about 100,000 pages, just under 100,000 pages scanned by the public, which was, all of these are huge changes for the culture in our agency. The idea that the public could scan things that we would put in our authoritative catalog is kind of scary. But we keep learning from it, we keep doing it, and as results come in and as things are not so bad, I think it's really changing the face of the agency. We also, in our Innovation Hub, have started to have meetings with like Wikipedians and other groups. We had a documenting innovation with the Latino tech community, National History Day. We do all kinds of things so that now we've had about 2,000 people from the public come in for innovation projects in our hub, and also 500 staff from the archives. So we also want to drive that innovation back into the archives and allow our staff to be innovative, but also working with the public. And this is John Dice, one of our best researchers here at the National Archives, giving a presentation to staff and public. This is the cool one, GitHub, which I know is it's very cool. So it's a repository for open source code is how we're using it. And this is a way of sharing with the public that we've never done before. So we're just a bunch of archivists, and we want to share our records. But this is now a way that we can share the code that we're using on things like our catalog, our open government plan, all kinds of things, so that people can use our API for our catalog or for Federal Register, all kinds of things, and create something totally new. And it's really exciting to be part of that. That costs nothing. GitHub is up there. You just go in. Well, it costs a little bit, but it's very minor. You know, it's a little tiny bit, and it'll probably cost more as we get more involved in it. But it's so minuscule on the price compared to trying to build something on your own and doing it. So if I had to say anything about getting people involved in government, use the platforms where they hang out, and they'll think you're cool for it. Okay. This is a mobile app that we just created for the World War I centennial that's coming up. And we did this one in a new way too. It's a beautiful app. You got to go see it. You can use it on Android or Apple. Go to either one and you can pull it down. So we worked with historypin.org that works on history, and John Voss helped us talk to teachers, curators, and different folks that we're trying to reach with this app, and to create something that especially teachers could just use easily in the classroom. So he went around the country and asked teachers what they would want. And what's really neat when you do that, when you do the asking ahead of time, then when you launch, it's kind of quiet because people are like, yeah, this is what we want. Yeah, that's good. Whereas in the old days when you launched, you'd have this fear of would people accept it or not. And now all of that's gone. And I think it's really because you're looking at putting people first, making people the center of what you're trying to do. Okay. Oh, and this is the final one. This is History Hub. So this is one of those projects where we are online on history.gov, and we had this idea, and again, it was one of my younger staff, smart as could be. She said, what if people didn't have to know if we were the Smithsonian or the Library of Congress or any other, but they just wanted to know what records there were out there about their family or whoever it was. And they wouldn't have to go to each one to ask, what if there was a central place? So we started to build this central place. We used a tool called Jive on the Jive platform, which has been used for many things, like the Apple forums use it. And in fact, we based our work somewhat on the Apple forums. If you just have a question, can I just ask it? And an expert from wherever can answer it, and maybe other people then can come in and expand on that and enhance the answer. And so we've been piloting that, working with it for several months. It's been amazing what people do. So I have some answers from the National Archives. Someone from Smithsonian will also have something to throw in. Someone from Library of Congress could also support that. But what's really cool are those researchers that are out there that know our records better than we do because they have the time to sit in them. And they can come back and answer those questions in ways that we just don't have the time or ability to do. So this has been one of the most exciting projects that we've been working on. I hope I can come back and tell you more about it next year. Okay?
Me too. Thank you. Thank you, Pam. We have about just a little under 10 minutes, and we certainly want to take some questions here, but I would really like to give you four an opportunity to talk a little bit amongst yourselves, because there's so many common threads here, particularly harnessing enthusiasm and collaboration and using that to build trust and using what you have already to get something much bigger. Do you have questions for each other or comments?
One thing that I think is pretty incredible about a lot of our different projects is trust, is that trusting the public and trusting each other, trusting the civil society organizations, that we're all kind of in this together and working towards a common goal. And I think that's incredible. I mean, whether you have someone, transcribing an old record or making, an edit in FOIA Wiki, I mean, you're trusting that they kind of have good intentions. And I think what's even more incredible is that that's borne out as true in 99.9% of the situation.
That's right. When you were talking about that earlier, I remember when we first started with a lot of social media projects, people are so afraid of what the public will do. There's a lot of fear on staff on what that public will do with our sacred holdings. And it takes little pilots to make them go, oh, well, nobody's doing terrible things. And we tried a little further and a little further. When you'd asked about how many staff you have like reviewing to make sure it's all cool, we're also trusting the crowd to help us review because it's too much. It is too much for any one agency to handle that. So if you can kind of reverberate it through the crowd, I think that makes a big difference.
The crowdsourcing in lots of different ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the thread of reusability.
Yeah.
A geekier way to put that is the open source ethos. When we started the Open Gov Foundation 4 years ago, open source and like real meat and potatoes governance was very, very new and scary. Open, like, does that mean open China comes in? Does that, but it's not open source, it's reusability, right? And everybody up here made a point of pointing to something else that they were repurposing and repackaging and not, thank the Lord, reinventing the wheel. And that's just fantastic. And there's a question.
Yeah. It's also fantastic that these days, unlike 10 years ago when you still had to explain why people shouldn't be afraid of open source, now people take it for granted that, yes, that should be the default.
Amen.
A big change. Yes?
My name is Li Yang. I just wonder, is it possible or whether you really have information consolidated about, let's say the people's inputs, let's say they want to know the occupation, like in Medicare physicians, how do they report it, whether they are any improvement or whether they have a go round and round without giving you the really information, whether there's a cost of patient services. Do we have this type of information or in a sense, a collection of people's complaint into one place?
I'm not entirely sure I understand your question, but I'm taking from it that one question would be for anybody who's trying to put the data out there, put the information out there, and what is your source? Again, it goes to the authenticity. Where is that information coming from? And you do have to, particularly if it's industries, you have to rely upon the fact that it is in the best interest of the industries or the business or the patients or whomever, that they want to give good information so that it's usable by everyone. Alex.
Hello, I hope you go check out cms.gov/open and see if they've published some data on that. ProPublica has also cleaned up a lot of that data, I think, too. So the last time I was here, I think, was for the FOIA Advisory Committee, and I asked about the status of the Freedom of Information Act portal that the United States government was instructed to make by Congress when it passed FOIA reform last year. And I heard that money had been budgeted and that appeared to be the Justice Department's Office of Information Policy had received that money, which was interesting or surprising because I thought that the White House Office of Management and Budget was also charged with doing that. Not clear what's happening. Do you all have any reflections upon that? And I ask that as a loaded question, Mike. Are you worried that the federal government's going to put you out of business by building a better FOIA.gov? What should they be doing here? Should we expect to see something better, or is FOIA Online going to be it?
Oh yeah, I can start. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of excitement about sort of a better federal FOIA technology, including possibly a good portal. I know that there's been a number of sort of federal efforts at portals over the years. I think one of the most promising ones was 18F's a few years ago, where they had a very user-centric design. They sort of had a very iterative design so that it was plug and play with the various systems that it would need to interface with. And I'm hoping that, I think one of the things I talked about earlier was that if a FOIA portal is going to succeed, it needs to change the paradigm and sort of meet people where they are. And I mean, one of the things that we've been integrating with our site is sort of an exemption appeal tool. One of the things we want to build out is sort of context so people understand when they get documents back. If there's been a number of efforts at a federal FOIA portal, and a lot of them have been sort of re-encoding federal law into a digital format. So far, that hasn't really been very popular with a lot of the public. So I don't know. I mean, if we're a nonprofit, so if the federal came out, we're actually open source. So we'd love it if a federal agency took our source code and put that up, and it has a lot of nice features and security and payment solution all built in. But if I never have to send a fax or lick a stamp again, I'll find a way to sleep easy.
Amen.
Well, I hope so. But I have heard that the DOJ might be considering them for the contracting, and I think they're a wonderful group, and they could do a lot of good in that area.
I think
Yeah.
one thing that's frustrating with the removal, a lot of agencies are removing email addresses as a way to submit FOIA requests, is that they're going from a standard that kind of everyone knows and understands, which is email, to totally proprietary closed-off systems. So like the FBI's new portal doesn't interface with FOIA Online. And so you end up having to copy and paste information from one portal to the next, whereas before you could just send an email, which seems like a pretty simple process. So I'm concerned that there's, I think, fragmentation among the federal government when it comes to how they deal with FOIA electronically. And I think it's in everyone's best interest, including the government, to make sure that there are standards across the board that are not only good for agencies, but that are user-friendly for the public.
Yeah, I think you're seeing a cool, at least on the stage here, a really cool new look at public-private partnerships. At least this is the way. I can't speak for everybody else, but if we as a nonprofit, right, and we're taxpayer supported, if we as a nonprofit can experiment, can try to push the ball forward in new ways, and then government comes in and copies that or builds off of it, that's all your taxpayer dollars hard at work. And that's a really fast way to get to a better outcome that really hasn't been used before. Proprietary software makes that a lot harder.
Yeah, collaboration is certainly going to help us get there.
One more.
One more, and then we're going to...
Make it awesome. Best question ever.
It's a lot of pressure. Might have to change my question. I'm Andrew Bergman again from the Environmental Data and Governance. Really appreciate all the different projects you described and this effort that you're talking about to sort of make FOIA accessible and go through all these hurdles. I'm new to FOIA myself, so I appreciate that Muckrock and things like the FOIA Wiki exist. I want to ask, sort of building on top of those like sort of amazing things that actually make it possible essentially for people like me to be involved. Is there any thought to how, whether it's advocacy groups, whether it's sort of coalitions of nonprofits, maybe working with government sometimes, working with industry sometimes, can come together, on specific topics, probably, but it's hard to say exactly how it would work, whether it's environment, climate, whether it's public health, variety of issues, and sort of, on top of what Muckrock does, making everything available, actually sort of pool capacity and say, some of us will work here, some of us will work here, we'll file complementary FOIAs, we'll manage them in a complementary way. Some of that might get at legal issues that are probably, is that all one organization? And maybe some of that becomes an issue for, this rule of 3 FOIAs leads to something being put up publicly. So I don't know a lot about that, but it'd be great to hear how you guys think that people can build on what you guys have done.
Well, I would like to hear, but let me also just say the way you just stated that sounds like, yeah, that's what we ought to be doing.
Yeah. Well, you mean you want competing nonprofits to work together effectively on something?
They're never competing, right? We all have the same goals in mind, right?
What a time to be alive.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, I think the Knight Foundation actually has commissioned, I think it was released yesterday or today, a big report on public records and FOIA and right to know.
Forecasting FOIA,
Forecasting FOIA, which I think goes into a lot of those issues and the need for collaboration. And at the state and local level, we have the National Freedom Information Coalition, which has a bunch of state and regional organizations that are trying to work together. And I think we need a broader engagement with these issues. And so I was really happy when Adam reached out and sort of said, hey, we're putting together the FOIA Wiki. We'd love to pull in Muckrock data, pull in FOIA mapping data, pull in the FOIA project data. And I think, we've always left our platform as open as we possibly can by default. And there's some stuff on there that, I think makes that you're going to disagree with in one way or another. But I think embracing that openness, pushing through that difficulty, and looking for collaborative points and shared cause when it makes sense is absolutely the way forward.
So I think we're at our end time. I'm going to maybe just sum up by appropriating Pam's phrase that I had not heard that I really like, and it sounds like we all need to embrace the cactus.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you. Good job.
Miriam, thank you again, and thank you to all of our panelists. Please join me again in a round of applause. We're at the end of our program. Thank you to our viewing audience. I also want to give a special shout out and thank you to our wonderful staff member, Amy Bennett, who is instrumental in putting all this together. Also to my terrific OGIS staff and to our special events staff here at the National Archives. Everything ran pretty smoothly. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, I actually have an exhibit here that I can show. Our annual report is out just in time for Sunshine Week. There are plenty of copies right outside. If you haven't already helped yourself to one, please do. And also invite you to visit our website, ogis.archives.gov. Annual report is up there, lots of other information. And you can also read our blog, The FOIA Ombudsman, and follow us on Twitter handle at FOIA_ombuds. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us in our Sunshine Week celebration. We hope to see you again next year. Thanks. Thanks.